Through the Well of Pirene by Ether Echoes. Chapter 1. The Forest Ways. And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. Revelations, chapter 6, verse 2. Daphne. It had been the worst day of my life. There had been such high hopes for it, but come mid-afternoon, my plans had been soundly crushed. As I stared out the kitchen window at the falling red and gold leaves of a warm Massachusetts autumn carpeting the street, the confinement of the house closed in. My friends must even now be driving off to the mall, where they would have an absolutely fantastic time without me. "Did you hear me, young lady?" Father asked in what he clearly believed to be a tone of patient authority. It sounded more peevish and moody to me. I glanced over at him, but he hadn't bothered to look up from his paper. I chose to interpret the president's stern face glaring out from the front page at me as my father's own for the time being. "Yes, Dad." The paper crinkled in what must have been a spasm of irritation. "What did I say?" Listening to the television with most of my attention made my answer half-hearted. "You want me to do stuff with Amelia today?" "I don't just want you to do stuff, Daphne. Your mother and I want you to watch over her tonight." Any hope I had for tonight's plans with my friends shriveled up inside me. "For how long?" "All night." All remaining hope burst into flames, instantly turning to ash. Sucking in a breath through grit teeth, I calmed myself before putting on my best wheedling face. I turned towards the paper, opening my mouth to address my appeal to the President of the United States. "Don't bother. I can't see the puppy dog eyes." He sighed. The paper shuffling sounded a bit like a sigh, too, for that matter. "Look, it won't kill you to sit for your baby sister for one day." "But, Daddy, what if it does?" I tried anyway. You can't fault a girl for trying. "It'll make for interesting funeral conversation." "Dad!" I pivoted, crossing my arms. "I should at least get something if I'm going to be stuck here all day. Babysitter rates." "If I wanted to pay for a babysitter, I'd hire a babysitter. Half." "3/4." "Half," he said, with a note of finality. That suited me just fine. He had forgotten to negotiate what the original pay rate actually was, and when he was tired after a long day out with Mother, I'd be able to drive a harder bargain. Small comfort from missing the day with my friends. At least I'd have money for tomorrow. "Deal." I perked up with a bright smile. "Now, where is Amelia?" Almost as if on cue, I heard the front door slam. "Speak of the devil," Father said. Small feet pounded along the floor. I turned in time to catch a muddy bundle composed chiefly of a pair of pink sneakers, a messy blonde braid, and soiled clothing as it barreled into me at twice the speed of sound. I yelped at the impact and fell to the floor. "And she shall appear," Mother finished for him, her own blonde hair in disarray as she slumped in the doorframe leading to the porch. She rubbed eyes as green as mine and gazed into the distance. "Amy!" I growled from the floor, trying to fend her off. It was trying to push a friendly squid away, for she seemed to have 3 to 4 times as many arms as she ought to. "You little rat! You got my new jacket all muddy!" "You're a rat, and your jacket is dumb anyway. It barely covers anything." She beamed at me with a toothy grin. "We're gonna play today!" Snarling at her insult to my fashion sense, or trying to strangle her, would only get me in trouble at this point. So I settled for grabbing her by the shoulders and holding her still while I stood up. "We are not," I said firmly, establishing my ground rules, or to be more accurate, my dominance, before it got any worse, "going to play today. You are going to sit, quietly, or play on your own, quietly, while I do something productive, like watch TV, or call up my friends." Amelia's face changed from beaming to hurt to cross to enraged, so quickly I could almost marvel at her changeling-like variability. It was like she had a superpower for gear-shifting emotions. "Daphne!" She She stamped a muddy foot.
"That's no fair! Mum promised we'd get to play today." "Well, it's high time you learned that life isn't fair," I answered a bit tartly, but I felt entitled to it. "Besides, Mum and Dad won't be here, so that means it's my rules."
"You and I need to have a talk sometime, young lady," Father said. I could just make out the top of his black hair from behind the paper. Mother was more direct, going over to put her hands around her messy younger daughter. "Now, Amelia, don't you throw a fit, or Mummy is going to be very cross," she said in a tone that brooked no argument. My sister stopped her complaint, pouting with cheeks full. "Daphne?" She lifted her gaze to me. "Please, play with your sister." "But, Mum!" I didn't bother with the wheedling face. It never worked on her anyway. "Just take her outside, go for a walk," she pleaded. Mother never really pleaded with her daughters, of course, but it wasn't a command yet. "Outside?" I grimaced, looking out at the warm autumn sky. It was so disgustingly wholesome and breezy. I might catch a lethal case of Ralph Waldo Emerson and start waxing poetically about fall colours and still forest pools if I went out there. "You used to love going outdoors," Mother complained. "All those nature walks as a girl, the trips with your cousins. I loved reading what you wrote about them." My mind flashed involuntarily to my bedroom, to a worn leather satchel in the closet. Buried within it was a girl's diary, which pulsed like the heart of a vile, nameless god. I shuddered. "That was then, Mum. I was like 5. Father rustled his papers as he turned another page, chuckling. "More like 8 or 9. You came home dirty as much as Amelia does. Whatever happened to that messy girl we had?" "Boys happened," Mother sighed. She took Amelia's backpack from around her shoulders and began to arrange the contents on the kitchen table with a mother's distracted efficiency. "Ugh!" I griped, throwing my hands up. "Ugh!" I added again, for good measure. "Fine, I'll do it, but only if it gets me out of this conversation." Before they could thank me, or scold me, or whatever it was they were planning, I marched into the front room and exchanged my fashionable jacket for one that would keep off the weather when it turned cold tonight. I slipped off my platform shoes and put on a pair of sensible tennis shoes. Amelia materialized at my side with a small bag, a magnifying lens, and a book of local insects poking out of one end. "Bye, Mum. Bye, Dad," I called, pushing the door open. I pulled my cell phone off of its charger before stepping outside, hoping I would be able to find some coverage out in the park. "Bye, honey," Mother called, leaning out of the window as we walked by. I began pulling my hair into a ponytail while Amelia practically skipped along behind me. "Have fun!" "Yeah," I called back, peering up to see where we were going. Down the hill there was a short road and a stretch of town between us and a forest which had gone largely untouched by humans for over 1,000 years, protected from exploitation in the early 20th century, and nearly unused for millennia for settler and native habitation. Its canopy, bright with the colours of an autumn afternoon, whispered in the wind, as if trying to tell every passer-by that even in the days it had seen human hands, it had remained mysterious for reasons of its rough terrain and fickle weather. How I had loved that enclosed secrecy as a child, flights of fancy taking me to faraway lands filled with strange and colourful things. "Yeah, right," I muttered again and trudged on. The sign on the side of the trailhead was largely ignored, save for a quick glance. I had seen it often enough before to know what it said. Everfree State Park, Massachusetts State Parks and Forests. Clear water hummed and bubbled softly below the footbridge, flowing over the smooth stones of the stream bed to expose the darting shadows of fish. I massaged a sore ankle while lifting my phone up to the light dappling through a tree cover, hoping to catch a stray signal through the holes. No dice. The bars remained firmly buried. With a groan I shoved my phone back into my purse and hitched it up, scanning the nearby trees. Spotting a bright golden head against the carpet of leaves, I started towards Amelia, careful not to slip on the mud from last night's rain. Amelia's eyes were focused intently on the bush in front of her, the entomology book open on her crouched knees while she poked at the leaves with a stick in fascination. I expected more people to be out in a part of the woods so close to the town. The day was beautiful too, but we were all alone. The holiday sales in town probably had something to do with it. People who weren't me were getting to hang out with their friends and get something done instead of heading out into the middle of nowhere. Evidently, my sister and I were the only ones who just had to enjoy nature today. Trying not to set my teeth too hard, I paused on an incline near her that had a view of an old gazebo, some park tables, and a long stairway up a hill that stood nearby. An old park bench lay invitingly within reach as well. Its worn surface was hard, yet inviting after the walk. I sat down and rubbed my ankles. The nearby hill caught my attention, and while considering the relative merits of a nap versus a hike up for a shot at better reception, I noticed Amelia had sprung up at my side. She held her hand up, and I recoiled at once when I saw the caterpillar nestled there. I made a face while the caterpillar lazily devoured the maple leaf it held, and ignored us both. Amelia only beamed harder.
Isn't it beautiful, Daph?
Of all the things in the world to have a childish fascination with, why did it have to be bugs? Even when I was her age, I had found them disgusting. They had too many legs, slimy skins, squirmy segments, and oozing ichor and soulless eyes and gross hairs and all the other horrible things bugs had. I had much preferred birds, and I could still pick out a few species among the trees around us. My amateur birding days had come to a right and proper end when I had put away my books and binoculars and other silly things. At the minimum, birds eat insects, which was a point for them in my book.
I don't care if it's going to turn into the most beautiful butterfly on the planet in an hour. You get that thing away from me now!
I growled, pulling my windbreaker's sleeves up over my hands to cover them and waving at my sister in an attempt to ward off the demon thing. Maybe the climb up the hill wouldn't be such a bad choice after all. Amelia's face fell. I knew I had disappointed her by yet again failing to enter into her world when invited. It wasn't like I was blind. I had been a kid once too, and had looked upon my older cousins with envy, and had wanted them to acknowledge me. Who seriously wants their baby sister tagging along with them everywhere, though? Didn't I have my own life to live?
Fine,
she huffed, bending down to deposit the caterpillar back on the bush. Not that the creature had cared. It had gone on pointedly ignoring both of us to continue concentrating on its meal. Amelia sprang back to her feet, once again flipping emotions like they were lines on a switchboard.
I know! We could go swimming!
It's the middle of autumn. We'd freeze.
Make snowmen!
I stared around with exaggerated patience before asking,
With what snow? Madmen, then.
No! Amelia bounced to my other side as I turned to walk off.
We could play catch!
I displayed my hands for her.
We didn't bring gloves or balls, Amy. Catch frogs?
No.
Climb trees?
No.
Ugh!
Amelia burst out in disgust, in a surprisingly good imitation of my outburst earlier today.
You never want to do anything, Daphne. You're so boring,
she shouted, stalking off towards the benches to sulk, her long golden braid lashing behind her like an angry tail. Starting towards the stairs leading up the hill, I turned and glowered at my sister, who was by then swinging on the worn, painted rails of the gazebo with a despondent air about her. She gave a big, dramatic sigh, probably because she knew I was looking. I brushed a few stray hairs out of my face and chewed on my lip for a moment. When my sister flopped unmoving on her back, I muttered under my breath. If she thought that pretending to be dead would get my attention, she was crazy. 10 minutes passed before I trod back, placing my hands in my pockets and making it appear as though I was there under protest.
Fine, Em. Have it your way. Let's play something.
I poked her limp body with a toe.
Yay!
Amelia cried and sprang up, revived from death at once by my concession.
Let's play a game then. Cowgirls and Indians, she suggested at once. That's terribly insensitive to Native Americans, Em. Space Invaders? Again with the games we can't play without tools?
I leaned against the gazebo's peeling frame while golden leaves swirled in the breeze around us. And no, I won't play it with my imagination, I added when she opened her mouth. Though I totally could.
Hide and seek? Bonnie and Clyde? Harold and Maud. Now you're just throwing names at me to see if I
paused, thinking back over what she had said. I snapped my eyes back down at her.
What was that one you just said? Harold and Maud?
No, the other one.
Bonnie and Clyde?
No! I snapped, my tone waspish. The one before that.
Oh!
She grinned.
Hide and seek. Do you want to play that?
My own answering grin might have scared her off if she hadn't been hoping for me to acknowledge her so badly. It was something of a Cheshire smile, toothy, wide, and mildly sadistic. There were beautiful possibilities in this game.
Yes, I do. In fact, I'll seek and you hide. All right.
She put her hands on her hips and looked me in the eye defiantly.
I'll bet anything you can't find me,
she declared. The poor, sweet, adorable thing. You're probably right.
I'll bet you a cookie you can't.
I'll bet you 10 cookies I can't.
Daph!
She rolled her eyes.
You're supposed to bet if you can. Well, whatever. Count to 100 and let me get started.
Okay, I said, with sweet poison in my tone. Turning to face the gazebo and setting myself, I glanced briefly to make sure she was running.
No peeking!
She glared at me until I covered my eyes with an arm.
All right,
I began, and started counting loudly, with a deliberate pace. 1, 2, 3. Listening to sneakered feet darting across the wood, and then over the leaf-strewn earth, I waited until I could no longer hear my sister running. 31, 32, 33, 34. I risked a glance, scanning the tree line slowly. 35, 36, I chanted, and started to creep away in the opposite direction from the one she had run. 37, 38, 39. I paused. Nothing. And 40 is good enough, I said, almost as giddy as she had been, and pumped a fist. Yes! Freedom! So I looked ridiculous, but it wasn't like anyone was around to spy on me. I had seen to that. Amelia would catch on eventually, of course, but for the next 2 to 3 hours I was as good as alone. With a new spring in my step, I started to make my way up the hill, with only a pair of thrushes dancing in the air nearby to keep me company. Warm afternoon sunlight greeted me as I began my ascent, the wind stirring my hair and the trees around me. Branches swayed and creaked, and the brush shifted with the passage of tiny animals. Without Amelia to distract me, there was nothing now between me and the natural setting I had let myself be lured into, and its rustic allure was trying to grab a hold of me once more. These woods might as well have been my backyard for how familiar they were, both here and in deeper parts where Mother and Father may not have been happy to know I had gone all on my own. It's why I didn't really feel as guilty as I should have about being so irresponsible and letting Amelia go unsupervised. After all, I turned out all right, didn't I? I had turned up at the door skinned, bruised, and covered in sweat and dirt more often than not. Trekking from hill to dale, fording streams, I would sometimes even scream my lungs out at the birds in the sky for the sheer joy of it. There, on top of that hill, I could almost see myself down by the river now. The old mossy log damming half of the stream below had been sturdier then, and I had walked on it every day to my adventures deeper in the woods, past the worn sign by the horse trail that pointed the way to Boston and the crumbling fence. Hard woods clustered along a rocky ridge in the west. It took little imagination to picture shapes lurking in the brush, darting from tree to tree. Fairies and goblins and overexcitable little girls' fancies danced at the edge of my mind, crowding to break back in. It seemed to me that I was forgetting something, and something very important to me at that. I didn't feel quite like looking at it, though, not directly, so I tried thinking about it obliquely, my eyes sweeping over the park expanse from my new vantage point, ankle pain quite forgotten. Tension began to worm its way up my spine as for the first time since arriving, I wasn't distracted from my own thoughts. I knew then that I probably should have refused to come here with Amelia. We could have gone to see a movie downtown or visited the horse ranch nearby, where a friend of mine lived. Instead, I had brought her here. Without much success, I tried to dismiss the unease I felt. This place was yesterday's news. It should have been behind me, and its hold over me should have been broken already. If that was true, however, why did I suddenly feel so very small, looking out over the trees and fields I felt were so desperately familiar? It had been nearly 10 years since I had last set foot among these hills, and yet it was like opening the first page of a book I had read 1,000 times. Well-worn books didn't make you tense up and dread what you might find when you turned the page, however. That was reserved for horror. Alarmed, I tried to think of something, anything, to distract me again, and stop the train of memories before they could collide with my composure. As it turned out, I had become so thoroughly lost in my own recollections that my phone had started to ring at least once without my noticing it. With a frenzied rush for my ringing phone, I fumbled for it in my purse, and answered the call before I could check the caller display.
Hello? Honey, finally!
My mother's voice came to me, jittery with the poor signal.
I've been calling for at least 20 minutes now. Where have you been?
I'm sorry. Unnecessarily, I pulled the phone away to glance at the display, seeing that it was indeed Mother's phone. I didn't have a signal until a minute ago.
Of course.
Mother waved it off metaphorically.
Well, your dad and I are at the theatre now. How are you two doing?
We're fine, I responded in that typically teenage manner guaranteed to raise hackles among most parents.
Are you playing?
Mother, with her laser-like focus, wasn't biting.
Yeah, we're playing hide and seek.
It was technically the truth.
Are you hiding or seeking?
Seeking? I scuffed idly at a dirt-covered stone buried in the hill with a foot.
It doesn't sound like you're seeking very hard.
Oh, please, Mum. Hardly any thought was needed for my answers. No one knows the woods here better than I do. If she can hide from me, she can hide from anyone.
I suppose so.
She laughed.
I guess if you get lost, you can always ask Leitmotif for help.
Ha! I responded at once in a forced laugh. It was almost like a grunt of pain rather than any gesture of amusement. I felt as if Mother had jarred my memory with a brick to the head, sending shards of teeth and thought bouncing across the mossy earth. Leitmotif! Right, Mum. Funny. Ha 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 ha.
I'm almost disappointed that your sister never developed an imaginary friend of her own,
she went on, oblivious to my epiphany.
You were so cute, always coming home with stories about your little adventures.
The tiny factoid that had been prying at my brain ever since I came back to these woods had popped out with the rest of the detritus. Buried under a knot of disappointment and layers of new memories, it had been unearthed with all of its sharp little edges. I was relieved to see that it didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. The pain had dulled. Leaning forward against the railing, I pulled my hair loose to let the wind catch and stir the strands. Taking a look down the hill, the wash where the creek flooded every spring caught my attention. I could almost see again 2 tracks in the mud, one small and sneaker-clad, the other big and many and round. I'm glad you thought my being a complete dip was cute. Real motherly of you. My tone turned a fair bit more bitter than I had intended. I felt small and oddly tender. It was as if she had just pried open a bandage on a sensitive wound.
We all have embarrassing little things we don't like to think about, Daphne.
There was a pause as she lifted the phone from her ear, talking to someone I couldn't hear clearly.
Don't get so wrapped up in being a teenager that you forget to laugh at yourself.
Nah, it's all right. I laughed it off. I just hadn't thought about it in a long time. I'm over it. It's just weird. Really, I barely even think about it anymore. I don't even like the woods. Waste of my time.
I understand. Well, your father and I need to take our seats now. Don't leave Amy alone for too long, all right? You know your sister loves you.
Yeah, I do. Even if she is a little brat. Bye, Mum.
Don't call the kettle black, Daphne. Goodbye.
Giving my phone a glance, I tossed it back into my purse and started down the other side of the hill, wrapped in thought. It had been a long time since I had thought of her. I whistled a little ditty with 5 bars, a rising and falling melody that would have been meaningless to anyone else. To me, in my memories, It was a key turning in a latch. Deep within my mind a vault unlocked, and a breath of air stirred dust off the contents. Turning, I saw a small, dirty girl in overalls burst from the brush, her blonde hair in a ponytail, with a garden trowel in one hand and a pot lid in the other. Little wings had been glued onto her hairband. "Ha!" she cried in triumph. "Behold, foul creature of the woods, I am Daphne, the noble Valkyrie warrior!" Rising from the muck of the stream, covered in pond slime and gooey mud, a terrible creature opened her mouth and announced in a piping, sweet voice, "Foolish human, you have tread too far into my domain, and you shall suffer 1,000 stinging deaths." On all fours she shambled towards the tiny girl who swelled in my imagining, becoming a righteous Norse shield maiden wreathed in power, her trowel now a folded rune blade, and her pot lid a bulwark of steel and hard ebony. The four-legged, shuffling, mud-covered figure began to hum a battle theme, and soon twisted into a slime-covered troll, her forearms lengthened horribly so that she could walk on them as she slavered and snapped her jaws. As vividly as if I were there in the past, the battle scene unfolded before me. If the details were a bit off, I hardly noticed enough to care. Dreams had always been better than the real thing to a girl of that age and temperament. The titanic battle raged across the field, overturning trees and flattening hills, drying rivers and cracking bedrock. "With my strength I smite at you, vile beast!" the Valkyrie thundered, and skewered the she-troll center mass. In truth, of course, the trowel bounced off a mud-covered flank with little noticeable impact, aside from sending crusted gunk flying, but the other girl sold it as if she had received a mortal blow from a mighty blade. She stumbled back on all fours, bellowing in agony. "Oh!" Ah! The girl toppled back and forth, prolonging her death scene. "Woe! I am defeated! Slain by a beautiful warrior, cut down before my time, ripped from the pages of history."
"Psst!"
the little blonde girl hissed.
"Vikings didn't have paper then, stupid."
"Never to be remembered except in infamy in song or story," the play troll lamented, slumping against a rock and flopping pitiably. "Oh, for shame! My children will know only of my defeat. Sing them my dirge, normal warrior." The little would-be Valkyrie rolled her eyes as the other began to improvise death lyrics on the spot, and deciding to finish the fell beast before she could die of annoyance, tackled her off the rock and into the nearby stream. Squeals of girlish laughter rang from the trees, startling birds from their nests, as the two struggled in the clear, crisp water. They splashed and dunked one another. They splashed and they giggled. Drenched, they let themselves flop onto the shore, exhausted and happy in that way playing children are when finally spent. The little blonde girl turned to her friend and giggled breathlessly, gasping out, "That was fun!" "Yeah, but next time I get to be the Valkyrie warrior." The other grinned from ear to ear. "A mighty Pegasus!" With that she put her legs under herself and rose, bracing with all four hooves to shake her dark blue coat, sending water and bits of river sand flying every which way. Her long mane and tail flopped wetly and shone a shiny black in the sunlight. The little blonde girl squealed again and shielded her face from the spray. Giggling, she rose and took the beaten hairband from where it lay, sliding it onto the now revealed filly's backside to adorn it with attached wings.
"Sure, but aren't you a unicorn?"
The human girl reached out to poke the horn protruding from her friend's forelock. Navy blue hooves warded her off. Grinning with her expressive face, its features faintly equine in the way a human's was faintly ape, she hopped onto the flat-topped rock and lifted a hoof proudly. "Then I'll have to be a powerful and fabulous alicorn princess." Taking a breath, I shut my eyes. When I opened them, I was alone by the stream bed, the rock and shore bare of my imaginings. My heart pounded in my chest. The doctor had said it would all fade with time. Would that it could fade a little faster. I couldn't think of anything else as I wandered among the trees on the old paths. I certainly didn't think of Mother, or Amelia, or other things not in sight. I didn't think of the latest fashions, or which boys at school were cuter than the others. I didn't think of bands, math homework, shopping, dances, television programs, or any of 100 normal expected teenage preoccupations I had piled between myself and the childish things I had left behind. 1,000 silly, vapid, distracting ideas served to separate the forest and who I was from who I became. As it turned out, this left me quite vulnerable, because without those distractions, every tree and bush in this land with which I was so intimately familiar became a gateway into a forgotten slice of memory. Here a foal and a little girl swung perilously on branches across a stream-cut ravine. There they paddled in a hand and hoof-made canoe down by the deepest part of the river towards the lake. They climbed trees over by the wash, and they caught frogs in the ponds. The girls had first met in the last snow of winter, over by the lightning-blasted pine, 2 young, curious creatures keeping their distance and feeling one another out, frightened a little, but with that bold spirit of reckless adventure that came to define them both.
"What are you?"
they had asked in unison, and then screamed at once in fright at seeing the other could talk, and ran for cover. The filly had been the first to laugh at her own fear, and the girl had followed suit. With my head filling up on flashes of recollection, and my heart thudding with half-remembered feelings, I paused on a ridge lined with stones, one that had the best view of the sky for miles in any direction. There, on one hot summer night, they pitched a tent and told stories around a lantern to frighten one another. I knelt down to peer inside, my eyes penetrating the cloth effortlessly, when, sleepy and giddy, with their bellies full of s'mores and milkshakes, and their heads cottony with a long day's adventuring, the little girl had leaned across the open survival guide she had pillaged from her uncle's army duffel bag, and thrown her arms about her sturdy neck.
"I love you, Light,"
she whispered, her fingers curled tightly in the long mane. "I love you too, Daphne." Leitmotif's forelegs closed around the human girl, squeezing her just as tightly. Daphne, which is to say I, had pulled away then, my face wet.
I'm going away for a week. But my family's going on a vacation,"
I had said, stammering over the words. I grit my teeth in the present time. I really had no reason to be crying. I knew I was going to see her again after, but little girls could be so ridiculous sometimes.
"Then it's back to school. I'll come by after school, I promise, just like before."
"I start school like a few days after that. I'll have plenty of time," Light said. Caught up in the mutual emotion, Light sniffed and rubbed her nose, her green eyes huge and shining. "Hey, I know! Why don't we go to your place when you get back?"
I don't know. My mum and dad, I don't think they like you."
I hemmed, but I could see the appeal. Ever since we met, my mother's tolerant laughter on being told of Leitmotif had rankled me. The thought of their faces when I showed up at the door with her in tow to see their faces was priceless. Leitmotif might as well have been reading my mind, her face splitting in a grin. "Come on! You know it'll be great! I want to see your new sister, too. I've never seen a human foal before."
"Baby,"
I had corrected absently, and beamed.
"Yeah, that's perfect. Then I'll get to visit your folks, right?"
"Sure. We'll bring everyone together for a big picnic, and it'll be like every pony is part of a big 2-species family, and we'll be like sisters." We hugged, and the promises had flown back and forth before we had curled up next to each other and fallen fast asleep. Mother had scolded me so fierce the next morning for staying out after dark that I couldn't help but let it slip. I would show her Light was real. I closed my eyes, banishing the images again, and settled down on the grass with a heavy sigh. The part that came next was the part I really wished I could forget, a part of my life that was going to keep aching no matter how long I refused to look at it. Taking in the late afternoon air and the wilting trees of the park, I realized that I had run long enough. I sat absorbing the beauty of a forest that was surrendering to winter's grasp, and realized that if I didn't, like the trees before me, strip my soul of the dying leaves of the past, I would never overcome the lingering fragments of pain in my heart, circulated with every pump of red sap blood. Bracing myself, I closed my eyes, gathered my resolve, and peeled off the unseen bandages.
"She is real! She is real!"
Little Daphne shouted at her mother. Her face was filled with tears, and her hands were curled into little fists. My parents kept insisting and insisting that leitmotif was just a dream, and I was so angry. I spoke to her. I held her. Why can't you understand? Daphne, please, just stop, Mother shouted over me. We are going home right now if you won't be quiet and listen to me. She didn't stay quiet. We did go home. I never did apologize for ruining our vacation, the last we had taken as a family after Amelia had been born. Add that to my list of things I need to do to get closure today. 3 days home. 3 days staring at the woods, knowing leitmotif wouldn't be there, leaning on my windowsill by the shattered remains of my bulky old-school Game Boy, smashed in a fit of quickly regretted pique. After all, I had said I was going to be gone for a whole week. She wouldn't bother coming back before then. She walked into class and told everyone about leitmotif, and they were all eating out of her hand, the other kids eager to hear about her stories. I stared down at a big wooden desk and a chair with a small, stubborn girl ensconced in it. A patient, kindly face adorned with spectacles sat across from her, his hands folded. She could pick out the typeface on the modest watch his wife had given him as a birthday present, and the round scar in his hand he had received in Vietnam. She came to know him very well over the next few weeks, so I could fill in those sorts of details easily enough. Her big mouth opened on that first day and told him, quite firmly, "Yes, Doctor, leitmotif is a magical unicorn, though she can't do any magic yet, and she doesn't have her special talent yet either, so she isn't sure what sort of magic she can do. And we're best friends, and I'm going to show everyone." She told him as much for 2 weeks. Images folded in my mind. A teary, uncertain face walking along the familiar paths. I could peer down the cliff and see myself now, with Mother and the doctor in tow. "Light!" she called. "Light!" "Let's go and see," he had finally suggested, sensing perhaps that my doubts had reached a turning point. After 2 weeks of him patiently pointing out the holes in my story, of how no one else had ever seen her, in showing me the children's stories of unicorns and fairies I had grown up devouring to show me the basis of my dreams, of using my own damnably intelligent brain against me to show how easy it was for me to make up perfectly rational stories on the most flimsy bases, he felt I could finally make a breakthrough. "Let's go and see, and put it to rest." "Light?" I had tried to call one last time, but it came out as a raspy whisper instead. I stared off into the darkening woods. Put to rest and buried. I lowered my face into my hands with the wind whistling past my ears and through my hair. All my childish things lay around me, all illusions stripped away. I tried to sever them, to let them join the blue sky at the far western horizon which even now had begun to darken into earliest twilight. If only burying someone and moving on were quite that easy. Amelia. I was so bored. I kicked a small rock, watching it bounce down the trail. Hiding had been fun, but I didn't see the point anymore. The sky started to turn red, and Daphne had not yet come crashing through the woods like a big dumb elephant. For the first hour or two, I had actually believed she was going to go through with it this time. I guess that made me dumb too. My book of insects lay open on my bag. The thought of going back to hunting was thrown out immediately, as I had already been collecting bugs for the last hour, and it was getting harder to find new ones in this part of the wood. My journal was full of sketches and notes. There were more than enough to blow my science teacher's socks off, and maybe his shoes as well. That made for yet another thing I liked, that Daphne didn't care enough to pay attention to. She just didn't get me. Leaning against the tree and watching the sky, I chewed my lip thoughtfully. None of my friends had any older siblings, so they weren't any help. How did you explain what it's like to be ignored by your big sister to someone who doesn't even know what it's like to have a big sister to begin with, let alone what it meant when she ignored you every time you tried to show how much you cared, or how much you wanted to spend time with her? Forget about explaining it to Mum or Dad, either. I scrunched up my face and gave my best nasally impression of Mum.
"You just need to try harder, sweetheart. She'll come around. She's a big girl and she wants to do her own thing now and then."
For Dad, I pictured a bullfrog I had seen in a cartoon and puffed out my cheeks, speaking as deeply as I could.
Mum's right, Pumpkin. Daphne's just trying to be a teenager. There will be a time for you to have fun together.
Idiots!
I shouted to the uncaring sky, startling a few birds, letting the world know how I felt about that.
And I'm not a pumpkin. I hate pumpkins. I'd rather be a kumquat.
That settled it. A girl could only take so much pushing around. I squared my shoulders like a lumberjack getting ready to face off with an ent, and stuffed my textbook into my satchel. Its bookmarks were carefully set in place before my journal went in behind it, tied shut with a big rubber band. Next came my magnifying lens, then my pencils and my crayons, and finally my compass. I snapped the bag's clasps shut and hitched it on.
All right,
I informed the beehive I had hoped to surprise Daphne with.
I'm going to find my sister and make her understand.
When I got back to the place with the benches by the water, I searched around to see if Daphne was just sitting around. Not finding her there, I hiked to the top of the hill, but she wasn't there either. I did find her shoe print on the flat rock at the top, however, so she probably went up here to get a signal so she could talk to her stupid friends. I hopped up on the stone fence and squinted around under the setting sun, looking for...
Aha!
There she was, her head tucked down and her hands in her pockets. I found a nice muddy spot and slid partway down the hill before running the rest of the way.
You traitor!
Daphne's head jerked up, and I almost skidded into an uncontrolled slide on the path in surprise. She'd wiped her makeup off, and her face was all puffy as if she had been crying. Which was impossible, of course, since everyone knew that evil queens had hearts of stone. Squeezing out my courage, I faced her down, as if there weren't several heads between us in height.
How dare you leave me out there?
I wasn't, she began, but I didn't let her continue. I was half afraid she might say something that would make me less angry at her.
Wasn't looking for me at all. You broke your promise. You said you were going to play with me.
I didn't actually promise anything, she said, which was exactly what I wanted to hear.
No, you didn't, and you never do. You're always saying you're going to do things, and then you dump me with the rest of the junk. I waited for hours because I wanted to spend time with you, and you were off talking to your friends and playing with your hair. Amy, I was just on my way... Just now?
It was getting hard to stop talking, like there was this train churning up inside my throat, and I kept on talking, faster and faster.
Just on your way now? Just like always, it's always on your time or not at all. When do I ever get to decide what to do? How long until you just take me out and leave me on the road somewhere so I can go off and be raised by wolves like you've obviously always wanted? If you don't want me around, why don't you just go away and stop jerking me along?
I continued with barely a breath to spare.
You're the stupidest, ugliest, meanest, most hateful sister in the world!
Daphne's eyebrows shot up, and I could see her colour rising. Good.
Well, you're the filthiest, brattiest, most selfish little sister the world has ever known.
The wind picked up, and the leaves began to blow hard across the ground, swirling around us. I gathered my breath and pronounced the most fatal, most unforgivable curse imaginable.
Well, if that's the way you feel, then maybe I don't want a sister.
A branch fell off a ways in the wood, as if to punctuate the severity of those words. Daphne was taken aback, startled, but it only seemed to redouble her anger. She lowered her face to meet mine, while I rose up to meet her on my tiptoes, nearly nose to nose.
Yeah? You wouldn't last 10 minutes without a sister. Oh, yeah?
I snarled back like a mean dog.
Yeah!
She hissed like an angry cat.
Fine!
Fine! I hitched up my satchel, turned, and ran. I didn't cry either. My face just gets wet like that. I'm not sure how far I ran. Daphne probably didn't even care enough to call out to me. Even if she had, I couldn't have heard her. I needed her as much as I needed fire ants in my shoes. Running up and down the hills sapped my energy quicker than I thought it would. Mum always had us stick to the trails when we came out here together. Sheer temper drove me forward through the backwoods until nightfall, and then I finally understood why some folk are afraid of the dark. Dusk was only about half an hour, but it was surprising how fast it got dark after the sun set. Somehow, the path had dwindled from a sneaker-trodden dirt road to a dinky little deer trail, ferns and other forest foliage nipping at my shins. It was already so dark I hadn't noticed until a branch snagged at my bag. Pencil outlines of trunks stood out from the edge of the path, and even those were beginning to fade into the shadows. The canopy was only visible above because it blocked out the stars. Without the moon being high enough to provide some sort of illumination, every tree and rock was cast in near pitch black. Even when I lifted my hand up, I could only tell it was there because it blocked the stars. The cold had me zipping my jacket all the way up and stuffing my hands into my sleeves. I might have shivered a little, but it had absolutely nothing to do with being scared. Any other girl might have been frightened, but not me. It was getting really cold, however, and it would get a lot colder soon. On a long night like this, staying up to watch the stars come out, it was nice to have a thick blanket and a cup of hot cocoa, both things that were disappointingly lacking just then. Determination and bitter feelings wouldn't let me be scared. I absolutely did not need a useless sister to hold me back either. It's not like Daphne knew anything about the forest anyway. All she cared about was her schoolwork and Facebook pages and boring boy bands. She certainly didn't care about me, or anyone real except herself. Jerk.
I'll show her,
I muttered. Taking my satchel off, I kneeled and carefully rummaged over its contents. Mum and Dad weren't getting home until close to midnight, so they wouldn't know what had happened unless Daphne had already called them, which she wouldn't.
I'll get out of here all by myself, and when I do, I'm going to tell her that I'll let Mum and Dad know everything if she doesn't do what I say. I'll be able to get anything I want, and she won't be able to say a thing, or she'll get in huge trouble. Maybe they'll even send her away somewhere. To prison. A prison on the moon would be nice.
It was a little better to hear my own voice while I worked. Not that I was afraid of being alone, or anything like that. Pushing aside my supply of cool mint gum in my satchel, I fumbled at a dark shape and blew a breath out in relief. With a click, the boxy flashlight taken from the garage came to life, forcing me to glance away to blink out the spots. It wasn't a good idea to point one of those near your face when it got that dark. I stuck a stick of gum into my mouth and pointed the flashlight back into the bag, seeing if anything else might be helpful. Out came the survival compass, its lanyard tied around my wrist. I didn't bother checking the temperature meter on the side. I didn't think I'd want to see exactly how cold it actually was. There was also the music player Grandmother had given me for Christmas, but if a bear was going to sneak up on me, I at least wanted to hear it coming early enough to scream before it gobbled me up in 2 bites, which would be really cool at least. Mum told me not to talk like that in front of other kids, but she can be silly like that. Who doesn't think bears are cool? Not seeing anything else of use, I carefully closed my bag up and stood, sweeping the flashlight's beam around. 2 pairs of eyes glowed back at me for a moment, making me jump. At the noise they became vague, blurring flashes, running away as fast as they could.
Okay, Amelia,
I whispered.
All you need to do is get unlost and leave the dark, coyote, or bear-filled woods and get back home. Then it's nothing but ice cream to eat and rubbing it in Daphne's stupid face for months.
I turned my wrist over and held the compass level. With the flashlight, the compass pointed out which direction north was, which meant I needed to turn around to head west to get to town. A quick spin on my heels set my heading, an eagerness to strip Daphne of all her dastardly big sisterly powers spurring me on. The harsh beam of the flashlight cut through the darkness and starkly outlined the brush and small rocks and hard shadows. It swept a long way among the trees, diffusing into a misty haze in places. When I was younger, I might have filled that low fog up with all sorts of things that might have been perfectly happy to gobble up a little girl who wandered from the path. But I was a big girl now, and I was going to get out of this mess all by myself. I hoped. The wind continued to blow, and the trees kept on rustling in the night, unseen but not unheard, as I began walking. Owls had been calling earlier, but they were quiet now. I began to wish I had taken out my music player, because it was starting to become more than a little eerie out here. Even a spooky soundtrack might have been better than nothing. There were other sounds, though. Bushes shifted in the dark, likely more rats and other rodents on the forest floor, and my shoes crunched on the fallen leaves and loose soil. Sweeping the light ahead of me every few steps kept me from falling into unseen holes. With the bed of fallen leaves, it was hard to see anything even with the light, but it was certainly better than going without it. Checking my compass after a while had me biting my lip to keep myself from screaming. I couldn't have gone very far, but I had already started to drift north, which was exactly where I didn't want to go, because the woods only got denser that way. There would be roads and settlements in almost any direction, but how long would it take to get there? And if I was getting turned around, I wouldn't get anywhere. Resetting my course and heading off into the forest again, I wished I had a cell phone of my own. My confidence started to dry up with my throat, and my earlier resolve not to call for help would have vanished instantly if I could have called someone for help, or at least been able to see the time of night or a map. A part of me even wished for Daphne to show up, if only so I could yell at her so that I could feel better, and we could be lost together instead of alone. When I climbed up a small ridge, though, I almost cried out. A light! I could see a light! It hung like a little sun over a trail, its gentle yellow glow beckoning to me like a moth to a porch light. Roots tripped me up twice before I remembered to stop running and check where my feet were landing. It would have been really stupid of me to fall and crack my head open at the final stretch, but I was just so excited to see any sign of civilization. Panting, I slid to a halt, falling over backwards on some loose dirt before the lantern. My braid hung in my face, nearly undone from the poor treatment it had received. The lantern swung slightly in the breeze, its light wavering around me. Looking around, however, I felt a sudden chill. The lantern's pool of light was an island within a sea of shadow and drifting shapes that I couldn't really make out. There weren't any buildings around, judging from the lack of light, not even a little outhouse for park rangers. I forced myself to cheer up, though. A light meant electricity, and it meant people came this way, maybe even at night. Getting lost on a trail would be a lot harder, too. Oh. Right. Getting lost on a trail was how I got into this situation. It all seemed a little strange for all that. The lantern, hanging on a curved post, seemed like one of those old-timey pieces they put up in the colonial part of town. It even flickered like a candle flame instead of a proper electric light, but it could have just been busted. There was more that seemed wrong here than just the light, though. I stared up at the sky, hoping to see the moon or something familiar, but even that seemed wrong. The stars in the sky were no help either. Constellations weren't hard to spot, but only Orion was visible, and it was in the wrong place entirely for this part of the year. Or I think it was in the wrong place. It seemed a little funny itself, for that matter, with some additional stars in places they shouldn't be. But none of that mattered. There was still a light, and it meant that I was in better shape than I had been, smashing through the woods. Turning my compass up, though, I could only stare at the little dial, eyes wide and jaw trembling. The stupid thing said I had been going east. Even as I watched, knuckles white around it, the needle inside wobbled a bit, as if it were unsure whether north was directly ahead or somewhat to the left. It was unbelievable. My trusted navigator broken. I nearly cried right then and there. Nearly. I'm a big girl, and I don't cry over stupid things like that, no matter how badly the night was going. Wiping my face, because it was cold, not because I was crying, I spun around and started down the trail, the cone of my flashlight watching the path ahead. It curved a bit, but the going was a lot faster now without having to worry so much about branches or roots or holes to trip over. There were little horseshoe-shaped indentations in the trail, too, so it was probably a horse trail. The family of one of Daphne's friends had a horse ranch outside of town. Hopefully, it was one of theirs. Maybe I'd get to ride home on a pony. With any luck, a sign would present itself along the roadside soon. There was neither a sign nor a pony, however. It certainly wasn't a ranch, either. I stopped along the trail, staring ahead with a smile creeping across my face. There was light, and not just a single light, but what must have been a whole house of light. I would have run if my feet weren't so tired, but I still skipped for joy. I froze. The pond and the clearing it was in had no house, and it lacked anything like lampposts or light fixtures, or even lanterns or candles. Instead, there was a full moon through the trees, which I knew was just last week. I had memorized all of the full moons for the next 2 years in case of werewolf attacks. Besides, the moon wasn't supposed to be quite that big or bright. Either way, it was almost as bright as daylight or nighttime in a movie. As I stared what I thought to have been a very shiny rock, fluttered. The biggest beetle I had ever seen or imagined popped out of the ground, its back a snowy luminescent white. It trundled along with its spindly egg-white legs and searched along the ground, prying up little morsels of green. Before anything could be decided about it, however, something else moved. That something else was so fast that I almost didn't see it at all before it struck. Long and sleek with smooth black fur, it had the look of a great cat, with alert triangular ears and a swishing tufted tail. It pounced from the cover of the tall grass and slapped its paws over the great white beetle, pinning it to the ground. The monster's teeth gleamed with their own unearthly light beneath the moon, and its eyes seemed bright with blue fire. A gasp escaped my lips, and a twig snapped underfoot for good measure. The beast's head jerked up, but I had already leapt and grabbed a limb of the tree beside me, hauling myself up and onto it before the thing could cross the clearing to look. My flashlight had fallen to the ground, for it was too big to stuff into any of my pockets. In its spotlight, the monster was illumined sharply, a powerful shadow. The beetle lay forgotten on the mossy clearing while the cat thing paused, looking up at me as I climbed up another limb to get even further away from it. It lifted a paw and turned my flashlight over. There was a low hiss as the beam caught it nearly full in the face. I could see that its claws, fully extended, were at least as big as a lion's, if not more so, and gleamed with the same witch-light its teeth did. Even as it smoothed its fur and considered me for its next meal, though, I couldn't help but be fascinated. I had seen lions and cougars and tigers at the zoo before, but they had never seemed as dangerously alive as this one, nor as beautiful. It had that same fluid feline grace and predatory posture as it circled below, and I hoped it couldn't climb trees if it decided to. There was no stopping it if it did.
"Not afraid, bear?"
it asked, and I just about let go out of shock. Its voice was as smooth and deadly and alien as the creature itself was, sounding like fine sand. There was an odd little click with the words, like some insects made, but I wasn't really thinking about insects anymore.
"Oh,"
it breathed.
"You'll be very surprised if that gets you riled."
You can talk!
I realized how stupid it sounded immediately, of course, but sometimes those things just slip out. Despite my fascination, instinct had me wrapping my arms and legs tightly around the branch. Shifting my body around slipped my unkempt braid from my back, however, dangling it low. Too low for my liking. The thing might spring up and hook me with its claws that way.
"Always the first thing they say to Morgwyn. Why not declare more important things, Baron? One might suggest, I am poisonous, or are you full?"
But I am poisonous!
I said at once, pouncing on the opportunity like it had on the beetle. I opened my mouth and blew a neon green bubble from the gum I had been chewing all night. The Morgwyn, or whatever it was, danced back another pace, its blue eyes wide and hot as the bubble popped, and I sucked it back in again. I didn't let relief show, keeping my gaze firmly on the creature. It circled back, slowly and more cautiously, the tufts on its back rippling.
"Oh, she is crafty,"
it hissed.
"Did she dose herself, or is it natural to her kind? One must find out."
I wasn't sure if it was speaking to me, or if the thing simply wanted me to hear its thoughts, but I didn't let it unnerve me. Dad's voice echoed faintly in my head, telling me not to show fear in front of those who wanted to hurt me.
Yeah, too bad,
I told it.
Why don't you go eat that pretty beetle instead? I don't want to get gobbled and you don't want your belly to melt.
By the by, the Morgwyn is quite content to interrogate it alone yet. None would dare touch its prey before it was done.
Well, I'm not alone. I've got a big sister coming, and she's the biggest, meanest, ugliest green ogress you ever did see. She'll pop your head right off if you don't leave me alone.
I knew it was a bluff, but there weren't a lot of choices open to me. The monster was a weird mixture of scary and lovely pacing down there. It was kind of strange, but I remembered how much I really wanted a cat just then.
The wee bairn is full of things to say, but not so full of things done. Yet a mind one of.
It paused, trailing off. Those fiery eyes looked off into the distance, the Morgwyn seeming to consider something, its hot breath steaming in the night air.
Yes,
it hissed, more excited now as it rotated back to face me.
You are the girl, the one who walks the woods.
Yes,
I answered immediately. It was a very important lesson I had learned from Mum's favourite movie of all time, Ghostbusters.
Yes. The yellow hair, the algae green eyes, the earthen smell.
I do not smell,
I protested, although the rest of the description was definitely me, and couldn't possibly be anyone else.
Forgive the Morgwyn's rudeness and threats, bairn,
it said, its tone immediately shifting. Its claws retracted and it sat down, lifting a bare black paw in gesture of welcome.
You have been expected.
It wouldn't surprise anyone to hear that I was suspicious. The spider was always welcoming when it thought the fly would come willingly into its home. Still, it could have attacked me at any time. If the Morgwyn was being truthful, maybe I wouldn't be stuck up here all night, or until it decided I was worth trying anyway. Besides, there was a girl who looked just like me who was being expected by weird monsters in the woods at night. How could I pass up on that sort of mystery?
Expected? By who?
I asked, intrigued.
Or what?
Why, the Morgwyn, and others as well.
It explained.
A fabulous kingdom awaits you, of song and magic. A land populated by griffins and dragons and unicorns and Pegasi, and more.
Unicorns? Dragons?
I gaped.
Surely, only a fraction of what awaits.
Chewing on my lip, I looked down at the Morgwyn, weighing my options. Stay up in a tree until morning and hope the Morgwyn didn't manage to eat me anyway, then try to find my way home, or risk the jaws of a giant demonic cat now so I could have a chance to visit a magical fairy tale land. Sold. Daphne. It took me all of about 10 minutes to realize what an idiot I had been. Not to mention a jerk, evil sister, or whatever other terms applied right then. Even if she had known her way around, letting a little girl wander around the forest when it was about to get very dark very quickly was about as irresponsible as someone could get. "Amy!" I shouted, for all that I knew it was pointless. Sulking by the stream had let the dusk go from red to a deep navy blue across half the sky, and for a healthy girl to run very far indeed. Twilight stars sparkled in cold mockery of my belated concern. With visions of a golden-haired figure lying broken and bleeding in a ditch spurring me forward, I ran the way she had gone. All my earlier anger was melting away now, as if the day's emotional roller coaster hadn't been harrowing enough. When I found her, I was going to grab her and shout at her and ask her why she had been so stupid, and then I probably wouldn't wait for her answer, and hug her and take her home and give her all the ice cream she wanted. I kept running, and my legs began to burn before long, dashing over the trails headed deeper into the woods. Visibility steadily declined as the shadows of the trees, already merged into one vast swamp of darkness, deepened. Catching my foot on something unseen ended my mad dash, pitching me face first into the earth. Once the dust had settled, I hobbled to my feet, massaging my face and brushing it clear of leaves and dirt. Ow! Panting heavily, I stared around at the dark forest, which refused stubbornly to yield its secrets to me. "Amy!
Amelia!"
I shouted.
It's Daphne!"
My voice echoed over the valleys. I waited. Nothing. There was no point in charging ahead without at least thinking where Amelia might have gone. If she left the trails, it would be very easy for her to get irrevocably lost among the trees. Only the most dedicated hikers and the park managers themselves knew the land better than me, but one of the first things I learned was not to go wandering off in the dark. If Amelia had taken this direction and kept to the trails, it would take her deeper into the woods, and the nearest habitation in that direction wasn't for miles. It all seemed impossibly bleak. If there was any hope of finding Amelia, It lay in one place. As a young girl, every trip out into the woods had a specific meeting spot in mind. That last time, with Mother and my therapist at my side, an hour had come and gone with no sign of my imaginary unicorn friend. The meeting site wasn't visible from here, not in the dark, but the towering old oak would still be there, unchanged by a mere 8 years. There was a good chance Amelia was there. If she had come this way, she would meet up with the river before long, and that would lead her straight to the oak. More importantly, it was the only place with shelter for miles around, and hikers often used it as such. Assuming Amelia had run out of bluster by now, she'd be there. So resolved, I pulled myself together and began hiking again, picking a steady pace and ignoring my pain and discomfort. The moon was too low, the earth was pitch black, and even with my cell phone lit and pointed toward the ground, the trek wasn't without its trips, falls, scrapes, and bruises. In spite of that, I was rapidly eating up distance now that there was a destination in mind. The area around here was more familiar than I liked to admit. Occasional glances at my phone's screen, which had a few new chips and scratches from my many tumbles, failed to change the lack of a signal, as if the whole of Western civilization had been left behind. A loon called with its eerie scream as I found myself on that familiar ground again. The grassy knoll, the cavern-like roots, a star-filled sky hanging over a rugged landscape. Even the lights of the surrounding towns could be seen from up here, staining the horizon with their night lives. They spread across so much more of the skyline now, yet another reminder of how things had changed. The wind bit at me, stealing away what little warmth my body held from the run up the trail. Rubbing my arms did nothing to stave off the shivering as I looked around. Nearly the entire park lay before me. From here it might be possible to catch a glimpse of her flashlight if she turned it this way. I scanned the darkness for the faintest pinprick. There. A flash of blue. I stared for a minute, conflicted. That was where she had come from. There wasn't time to allow myself to be distracted by such thoughts, though. Only one thing mattered right now. My little sister. I ran. My breathing heaved, and I tried my best to quiet it. A younger Daphne might have been able to deal with this sort of exertion, but a few years of sedentary living could do a number on someone's energy. By the surrounding scene, however, it seemed that calm and quiet was going to be important. I lifted my head carefully over the log I was hiding behind, and stared down at the grove, which rose on the side of the hill by one of the deepest parts of the river ravine. 3 short men were down there, hand-held lanterns arrayed about them. Each was wearing a strange overcoat and had a weird look about them, but I knew thugs when I saw them, all hair and muscle and bad teeth. Seeing the lantern light had nearly given me a heart attack, and trying to approach through the dense brush on the top of the hill had been liable to kill me as well, but I was glad I had. Sweaty, dirty, bruised, and maybe a little bloody, I crouched down among the leaves and covered my hair with the hood of my jacket to keep anything shiny from showing. It was just like the games I used to play in the woods, only now it was all too real. One of the brutes was rubbing a long, knotted stick in a nervous fashion, watching the approaches to the grove warily. Another, digging at a tin of something dark and fragrant, grunted,
"Morgwyn coming?"
Yep.
"Shoulda got the girl. Same as last 6 times you asked,"
the one with the stick said, his voice even more guttural and unpleasant than the other.
"Only asked 4 times,"
the one with the bean can complained, stuffing a handful into his mouth.
"That's only 'cause you can't count past the 4th finger on your right hand. It never occurred to you to use the other one, even though it got 5. Shut your mouth! Just 'cause the big guy gave you the shiny stick don't mean nothing,"
Bean Can growled and glowered at his companion.
"It means there's 1 set of brains between us, and I got a full share."
The one with the bean can frowned at that. The hitherto silent one spoke up.
"Wait, don't that leave us with... Wait, no, you gotta carry the 2...
The stick came down with a snap. I swear there was even a flash of harsh light, like he'd just struck a magnesium rod against the rock, and I had to restrain myself hard from jumping. Now where the hell did that come from?
"Quiet," he hissed. "The Morgwyn's coming. Saw its devil blue eyes just now, and if you turn your back on it, I'll make it think you're weak. So help me Discord, I won't lift a bloody finger to save you."
They all rose up, and the other 2 even lifted what looked like big, ugly woodsman's axes. All 3 stood in tense silence. All three of them seemed to be genuinely wary, even afraid. The wind stilled. If it was hard to keep from crying out before, it became nearly impossible when my sister strolled into the glade. It was even worse when I saw the thing she was walking at the heels of. Devil blue eyes, like two bright stars burning in the dark beyond the circle of the lanterns. I hardly had time to react when the man with the stick lifted it into the air, and at once lights burst from its tip, filling the air with their magnesium glow and casting a light as bright as day. They hovered and spun like hissing comets. My heart raced, and I felt every tendon in my body tense, as if seized by electricity. I was transfixed by those lights. I knew it. I knew it was real all along. Not 2 hours ago I had told myself that I had buried all of my hopes and dreams in leitmotif herself, and here were all three being suddenly and violently unearthed. A monster cat and a magic wand, right in front of my eyes. Weeks of being told I was fooling myself. Months of being told magic isn't real. Years of saying I didn't care, that I didn't want to think about it. Those choices had led me to put away all the childish things in my past, so I could get on with my life. All of it could go straight to hell.
I knew it!
I shouted, springing up into the air with all the joy I had bridled deep inside me, hidden away in the dark recesses of my soul so I wouldn't feel it ever again. 5 sets of eyes turned towards me in the sun-bright clearing. Oh, damn it! No help for it now. I reached down, grabbed the branch I had left for just this purpose, and heaved. My purse, with all of its useful contents emptied into my pockets, came flying out of the dark beside me, and with my scarf unraveling from the tear I had made, showered all three of the ugly men with heavy, fist-sized rocks and a great deal of dry sand from the riverbank. The one with the bean can was brained on the side of the head and went down with a bloody stain, catching himself on one hand, while the other 2 were surprised and blinded.
"Run, Amelia!"
I screamed at the top of my lungs, even as I gathered myself. It was totally insane, but I had no other choice now. I had to protect her. I had to. I put my feet on the log, and leapt like a lioness at the man holding the magic wand, or at least a very angry house cat. Even though I probably had half his mass, I collided with him while he was still rubbing sand out of his eyes and with all the force inertia and gravity could lend me. The impact knocked the wind out of us, but I recovered first. He tried to hit me with the knotted stick in apparent instinct, and I grabbed it in both hands. A great gout of white flame shot from the tip, and it grew hot in my hands. The other 2 brutes dove for cover as we began to struggle over the wand. He with the greater strength and impaired vision, I with the better vantage on the wand, and a fierceness born out of righteous fury. With every twist, the wand shot off again. One beam hit a nearby tree, and it burst apart immediately, logs of sawn lumber raining down like a lumberjack's ill-timed wish. I heaved, turning the wand again, and it swept sparkling light over a pile of leaves. A great shower of white birds flooded into the air as the pile changed, shrieking and clawing, washing up into the dark like the foamy spray of an ocean wave. The others didn't dare come closer, not with the wand firing off this way and that. I swore I heard an elephant's trumpet, and one of the rocks that had tumbled by the campsite bucked and leapt like a horse. Pine cones burst into smokeless fire, and the other 2 brutes yelped and rolled to keep their clothes from alighting. I shrieked and dug my foot into the struggling man's face, and balls of blue plasma bubbled out of the wand to land around us, swallowing holes in the earth with barely a whisper of effort. The one with the bloodied head shrieked in a high-pitched voice and fell back from one of those globes, losing his heavy leather bag. Every blast of the wand was like a gunshot going off. I wouldn't have been surprised to see blisters rising on my palms from the heat if I could see more than faint flashes. The white, magnesium-bright blasts left me nearly blinded with spots, and each burst of sound left my ears ringing. My heart stopped as a flash went off near my face, with each individual spark showering off the tip and leaving a bright trail in my vision. Where it hit I had no idea, so consumed by the struggle and violence of the magic that nothing was distinct anymore. With all the pandemonium, I believed for a moment that I might actually get through this in one piece, if I were quick enough. It was like the games Light and I had made up together, fighting against imaginary thugs of our own making. I wished I could see where my sister or the cat had gone, but I had to keep all of my attention focused on the task ahead of me. Maybe, if I could get the wand away, I might have a chance. If I could only get my foot under him. I had to. When my weight shifted, my foot slipped in the mud, throwing me off balance. The wand slackened in my grip, and for one horrible instant, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. With a great heave and grunt of effort, the man under me shifted, throwing his weight behind his shove and pushing me back. With the wand in a death grip, it almost came back with me. Instead, its tip pointed directly at my chest. Alabaster light filled my world. I felt myself drifting back, softly, as if on a bed of clouds, watching the trees float by me through a haze of pearl fog. I was falling, gently now. Down. Down I went. With nary a splash, I slid into the dark water. The surface closed over my body, and in my mind, a dark river too swallowed me whole into its depths.
Through the Well of Pirene by Ether Echoes. Chapter 2. A New Lease on Life. I know all the fowls upon the mountain, and the wild beasts of the field are in my sight. Psalm 50:11. Daphne. Death could have been better. Really, there wasn't too much to complain about. It felt very soft, clean, drifted me along as a mote in a black sea rolled gently by its invisible currents. Still, everything seemed so terribly unfair for it all to have ended like that. There was no way to know whether or not my sister was safe, to know that my death had meaning, or to see my parents and friends one last time. Even with just a moment or two as a ghost, there could have been a friendly little scare, and some goodbyes for closure. At the very least, it would have been nice if there was something more to this whole death thing. It felt all right, but there was nothing to see, nothing to hear. Everything was surprisingly warm, too. My entire body felt suffused with heat, like I had spent all evening in front of a fireplace, under a toasty wool blanket, instead of slogging through the mud and leaves on a cold night, bloodied, battered, and hurled into an icy river. Among this warmth, an alien sensation, a peculiar tingle mixed with a feeling of displacement, flooded my every sense. Despite this, my mind was clear. When the discharge from the wand had hit me, my head had felt stuffed full of cotton. Considering that, however, apparently stirred up the aches and pains out from whatever fugue I had been under, my leg joints and muscles complaining at the extreme paces they had been put through. Vicious, biting cold pierced my sheltering cocoon of warmth, quickly robbing me of what little comfort and security I had left. Immediately I seized up, but found myself constricted, with clothing and water pressing in from every side. Stark terror took over where contentment laid off, leading me to conclude that flailing wildly with my arms and legs would be the most constructive use of my time. Spots swam through my eyes, and my body suddenly felt like it was being bent in half. Realization slowly sunk in. Unless death was a freezing river sweeping your battered body through a Massachusetts state park, I was still very much alive. How much longer that would remain the case, however, had yet to be determined. Choking initiated the process that the wand had failed at. I faded. My struggles grew less and less powerful. In a last-ditch effort to survive, I drew on every half-remembered swimming lesson I could bring up, relaxed my body, and kicked desperately, hopefully, towards the surface. A stunning impact to the side of my head ended that hope. River water flooded in. Everything went black. Racking coughs shook my body awake and forced water up from my lungs. Cold, frigid air bit at my soaked skin in a way the river never could, as I lay breathless against the ground, stunned with pain and no small amount of disbelieving relief. In the time that was lost to me, I had managed to wash ashore on one of the many grassy banks that lined the river. Still half submerged, with my legs and most of my lower body tugged on by the gentle current, I remained still for several moments, dribbling river water like an invalid. Vague, unfocused fears of hypothermia led me to make my first feeble attempts at dragging myself ashore. A sudden lack of energy in my sodden, heavy clothing made for slow going. Every movement, every inch traversed, coerced more water and silt, buckets' worth, it seemed to me, from my throat and lungs, my body clenching and shaking. As the fits subsided, my breath returned in ragged, painful burst. "Not gonna die here," I rasped, shivering, before continuing to drag myself further inland, like a worm inching along the ground. My legs and arms were leaden and useless. Maybe that blow to the back of my head, which now throbbed in exquisite agony, had left me crippled, but head and spinal injuries were a bit outside my high school curriculum. After struggling to a drier spot, I gave my limbs an experimental wiggle, and found that they were at least responsive to my will, though they felt tight and restricted. My fingers were completely numb, however, causing a whole new wave of panic. Attempts to move them elicited no more than weak flopping. Hypothermia was setting in. The quickest remedy would be to get out of my wet clothes, so I struggled to sit myself upright. A few false starts saw me rolling halfway up before dropping on my side when my arms failed to support me. Dizziness would have kept me down, but I grit my teeth and pushed through it regardless, half turning again to make another go. As my body craned up, my back gave out, forcing me back down onto my arms. My shirt fought every inch of the way, and it became another battle just to get it off. Precariously balancing on one arm, I attempted to slip my other numb hand under the hem, and was met with little success. All that squirming just tangled me up more tightly. Something was wrong. All of my clothing was hanging awkwardly, wrapped too tight in some places and too loose in others. The gibbous moon had risen above the tree line, which was a profound relief, though a bittersweet one, for it meant I had been out for what must have been at least half hour. Light from a moon that bright is surprisingly easy to see by, however. Now that my vision was clear, it appeared that there was a horse trail nearby, faintly visible. As for my own state, it took a moment to process exactly what I was seeing. My arms pressed into the loamy earth in two stumps. That alone might have been enough to make me scream in panic if I had not been distracted by the sight of my legs, splayed out to either side as I sat. They, too, ended in bare stumps, my shoes and feet, apparently long gone. My clothes hung on me, in a wet, sodden lump, with no respect to proper shape or form. A reasonable person might have considered the evidence and come to some sort of rational conclusion. She might have examined the situation more closely, and thought of some way to deal with it. I, however, screamed, and flung my limbs every which way, losing my balance and falling back with a splash. My stump of an arm got inside my shirt and pulled against it. With a tear the fabric shredded, freeing me from its grip. Trying to stand upright was a forlorn endeavour which had my back and legs buckling as my balance failed entirely. For a few moments, any night birds that might have been watching were treated to the sight of a strange, stunted creature dancing across the water before she missed a step and crashed on her back. With my cries piercing the night, and sending animals and birds flying in fright, I flailed all four limbs skyward until I had shouted myself out. I lay there panting, chest heaving, with hair hanging over my eyes. The star-strewn sky turned pitilessly above, indifferent to my terror. It wasn't until breath and sanity had returned that I could brace myself and look down to take in what I had become. If there was anything human left on me, it wasn't visible from where I lay, stretching up to get a look at myself in shock. A smooth, barrel-like body, covered in a very fine, if very sodden, pale coat, had replaced my own. Though there were still only 4 limbs, they were all legs, and they all ended in solid-looking hooves. There was a flick along the ground, and a wet tail flopped weakly, rendered nearly colourless in the moonlight. It could have been the same blonde as my own hair. I craned my eyes up and beheld a world horn protruding from my forehead, shadowing my face. It was nearly enough to make me pass out all over again. There was no mystery as to what I was, of course, now that all the disparate facts had been put together. My supposedly imaginary unicorn friend had been small, with different proportions, but she had been as much a child as I. Still, I rubbed my new hooves all over myself anyway, discovering that there really was nothing left of the old Daphne. Long ears twitched as I touched them. My face ended in a short, blunt snout. Several years of adolescent development had simply vanished from the rest of me. With growing panic, I opened my mouth and tried to speak, but only terrified neighing issued forth. Wait. I rolled my eyes and smacked a hoof against my forehead. Ow, I grunted, carefully rubbing the spot I had struck myself, having discovered how hard a hoof could be. Being stupid and losing my head was going to get me into more trouble. You know you can speak, I informed myself disgustedly. You've seen Leitmotif do it often enough, and you did so yourself just a minute ago. Tears welled up as the name invoked the emotions and memories I had sought to bury only hours ago. Leitmotif, I murmured. Those treacherous thoughts twisted in my guts like a jagged icicle, cold and grating. For 8 years I had convinced myself that my best friend in the entire world was nothing more than a silly girl's imaginings, and now I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that she had been real. With all the screaming and flaying about done and over with, I became acutely aware of how cold it was, and dangerously so, with me still sopping wet. The shivers kicked in again as I tried to deal with my reawakened pain and present fears. Amelia could be miles away by now. I didn't even know if she was still alive. It was time to get help, but what would happen to me if I went to the police? Terrifying flashes of movies where the alien or the other had been hunted down and dissected on an operating table seared its way through my brain. I shut my eyes before the image could conjure itself in stark detail. Sometimes imagination could be a liability. Deep, careful breaths, Daphne, I told myself, trembling. Just like Mum says, you got to breathe first, and then you can worry about what comes next. I considered my next move. Without a doubt, my first priority was finding out if Amelia was all right. Consideration of my sudden equanimity, equinehood, marification, could wait for the time being. The first step would be to call the police station to see if anyone had picked her up. They'd also be able to call the rangers and find out if anyone there had found her. At least I still sounded the same as before. It would have made for an awkward phone call if my voice had come out equinified as well. Reaching into my pants pocket, I pulled out my cell phone. At least, I tried to. Shoving my big hoof in there just stretched the fabric and failed to go deep enough. Tapping against the case was all I could manage. Trying to dislodge the cell phone by shaking my hips proved a useless effort. It was irritating, but removing myself from the clothing would be the quickest way to get at it. Shrugging the rest of the way out of my clothes was hard, but it could have been worse. Scrunching myself back as far as possible let me fit my forelegs back through my sleeves, and I simply walked out of the tattered remnants of the shirt. My sodden pants went next by the simple expedient of pinning one pant leg to the earth and pulling the pinned leg free. Even so, grabbing hold of my discarded pants to dump the contents of its pockets on the ground was like learning to use chopsticks all over again. It took tipping both of my forehoofs together to pinch the bottom of the pocket, flipping it over, and tilting my butt to get a good angle. Obligingly, the phone slid out, and I pumped a foreleg in triumph. Clack. My hoof tapped against the screen. Nothing. Gritting my teeth, I pinned it down with one hoof, and tried to nudge the tiny start button. After a few false starts, it finally clicked. Nothing. When it became apparent the phone wasn't turning on, I snarled at myself. Idiot! It fell into the river. In a flash of sudden fury, my left hoof came down hard, cracking the screen and splintering the case. The sound of snapping plastic jolted the red glare from my eyes. Stunned, I examined the damage. It was fairly excessive. My little hoof straight up ruined that case. It might as well have been a sugar cookie. Well, it's not like the stupid thing was going to work anyway. I braced on all fours and shook like a dog, much as Leitmotif had done time and again. Drier, if not much warmer, and certainly none less exasperated, I considered my pants. Light had been able to pick things up just by touching them with her hoofs, but placing my own hoof against the article yielded nothing. Reality refused to accept that logic, despite all my rage and frustration being directed towards the tattered garment. Giving up, I bent my head down and picked the whole thing up in my mouth, slinging it into my back, where it hung along my flanks and obscured my dripping tail. Hopefully, whoever found my soiled shirt and underwear wouldn't think some poor girl had been assaulted and left for dead. Though, technically, I had been. Still unsteady, I started towards the horse trail, chewing on the irony of such a thing as I planned my next move. Becoming more confident in my motions, they turned from a drunken wobble to an awkward walk, and then progressed to a steady trot that felt way too weird. The whole thing reminded me uncomfortably of baby horses learning to walk minutes after being born. My gait must have seemed ridiculously cultish, with its 2 high, careful steps. The moon rode high in the night sky, but the deep shadows it cast still hid many dangerous secrets. It would be just my luck tonight to land in a pothole and break a leg. All of this walking was useless if it didn't take me somewhere, though. If I was going to help Amelia, I needed to find help myself first. Where could a weird alien horse find help at this time of night, though? A light bulb went off over my head, and I knew exactly where to go. Picking up a pace on a solid, well-used trail, I put on speed and hurried into the night. When the warm lights of the Sun River Ranch came into view, surprisingly little time had passed. My pace was eating up ground at an unbelievable rate, with barely any effort on my part. It had been rough going before, sure, but I was walking much farther and much faster on legs that had been complaining at a stiff walk an hour ago. Maybe being turned into a freak wasn't entirely bad, if it meant finding help before midnight. Though it certainly had an aspect of commercialized Western glamour as a place for modern people, especially horse-obsessed young girls, to get a chance at riding or owning their own horse in a safe and wide-open setting, my friend's family ranch never felt artificial to me. The land had been a mixture of farm and pasture held by some part of the family for generations, and consolidated under one roof, and it was still very much a place where an extended family made their living off the land. The family's western apple orchards were nearly bare with autumn's toll, but I looked up hopefully as I passed. My stomach grumbled in a plaintive fashion, empty since lunch, but there wouldn't be many leftover apples here after the October harvest. Besides, I wasn't quite sure I could reach one even if there was. The long fence marking out the property was surprisingly daunting in my current state. Climbing it would have been easy before, but chancing it now seemed reckless. Light had been able to scrabble up the trees and rocks just as easily as I could when we were kids, but the thought of getting up off my hooves and trying to scale a fence without proper arms made me dizzy. Setting a hoof against the lower timbers did nothing to bolster my confidence. With a grimace, I decided against it. Instead, a quick trot along the gravel road beside the fence led me towards its gate, the rhythmic crunch of my feet striking the earth disturbing the still night. The latch was dealt with in a fashion few horses on earth could replicate. Rising up on my hind legs, sticking my face over the side, gripping the latch in my teeth and pulling. The hinges creaked loudly and the gate swung open, inward instead of outward, as I had thought it would. My weight pushed it open and dragged me along for the ride, my hind legs skidding along the dirt before the gate tossed me inside. I tottered a few steps on my rear legs in an inelegant ballet before toppling unceremoniously in a pile of messy hair and wet pants. When barking erupted from the house, my heart froze. It started beating again, faster and faster, as I scrambled to all fours, imagining the dogs leaping out of the house and charging across the field to pounce and tear at my unprotected form. They would haul me down by my mane and tail and drag me away to cruel experiments, to put me on display somewhere, to have me pulling carts in gem mines or some other terrible fate. Breaking into a gallop, I raced away, looking for a place to evade them. Instinct kicked in at the first opportunity, which was probably how I cleared a full-foot hurdle instead of balking at the difficulty. My landing was spoiled somewhat when I flopped flat on my belly on the other side of the stall door, skidding slightly on the hay, with the barking growing louder by the moment. As my eyes were adjusted to the moonlight outside, it was difficult telling exactly where I had landed. Standing up answered that question, however, when a big mouth nuzzled the back of my neck with a whicker. "Eee!" I squealed at the top of my lungs and darted forward. Spinning, I gasped for air, eyes wide and my tail held protectively close against my side. "Hector!" I spat, glaring at the big horse in the next stall. Apparently he had managed to recognize me in my present state, or at least thought it would be fun to surprise me. I had ridden him, or seen him ridden often enough to know what a pain he could be. It was still a little hard to make him out in the dim lighting, but it became considerably easier when a flashlight swept over the stable door. "Crap!" I groused, realizing my girly scream had probably been heard quite clearly in the quiet night. There were voices now, the deep tenor of my friend's father and the lower still bustle of her uncle. "Figure someone's trying for the horses, Victor?" my friend's uncle asked. Her father replied skeptically. "Horse rustlers in this century. Come on, Mark." "That's why it's the perfect crime. Nobody ever sees it coming." Panicking, I stamped my hooves in a nervous little dance, trying to think of a way out that wouldn't take me to the dogs or the sight of the approaching men. "I never heard something." That was Mark again, closer this time, like someone's alarm going off. "Horses are up. Well, let's at least have a look. Jim, you take the dogs back. I don't want them jumping and getting everyone in there all excited." "Sure, Dad," a younger man's voice said. That was good at least. No dogs. They still had the entrance to the stable blocked off, however, but there had to be another way out of this. The stall latch clicked, and the door creaked open. I froze just for an instant, eyes wide as the light swung my way. A surprised shout following me as I bolted. If memory served, there was a loose board in the back of the stalls, one that would rattle and shake in a good wind, and was always letting rabbits in. Hopefully, Victor hadn't managed to nail it shut as he always promised he would. A painful crash had me halfway through the wall. Adrenaline fueled my legs and pushed me the rest of the way through. Turning about outside, I craned my neck back through the opening, snatching up my pants between my teeth mere moments before pounding booted feet reached the back of the stable. Trying not to trip over the flapping pant legs, I raced for the other side of the house. Distantly, Jim was calling for his father and asking what was wrong, but, bless him, he didn't let the dogs' leashes go, no matter how much they sawed at their leads. Panting with fright, I circled a small part of the yard near the garden. The house itself is a meandering affair with many wings and additions, but I knew where I was going. Boldly leaping onto a pair of barrels and then over the white picket fence they were lined up against, landed me within the house's garden, which sprawled lazily along one side of the building. In the house, lights were being turned on, and voices were coming from the kitchen. A woman was almost shrieking, shouting at the men. "Victor! Jim! Mark! What is it? A burglar? A killer?" "God's teeth, I've never seen anything like it," Mark answered as I panted for breath, creeping along the outer edge. "It had these bug eyes, and it was all pale and sickly." The hair rose on the back of my neck. I know I must have looked like death warmed over, but pale and sickly? Bug eyes? He was making me out to be some kind of monster. Fuming, I grit my teeth and kept low. My body was far more flexible than any horse had a right to be, and it was disturbingly good at moving like that. Leitmotif was proving a good role model again. Raising my head up, I prepared to check the room I had originally come to see. The noises from the kitchen grew more frantic. "It's an alien, Victor," Mark insisted. "Now, brother, I know I saw something weird, but what if there's more of them? What if they've come for my babies?" Molly, Mark's wife, demanded in increasingly shrill tones. "Keith, Frank, get the guns. I'll call the police." My chest became a drum for my heart as I peered over the edge of the window-sill, looking past a potted lily to the room within. It was like a princess's room, or, at least, a princess who had every modern amenity a doting father could buy. Many girls who had nothing but brothers and mostly male cousins became aggressive tomboys as a result, but my friend Naomi was about as far from being a tomboy as Pluto was from Earth. An extensive Daddy's Girl program had rendered her utterly and irrevocably girly, but I loved her for it anyway. An explosion of pink frills and lace met my eyes, and I scanned the plush-strewn bed for any sign of her. The covers had been pulled down, so I knew that she had been in bed and reading one of her favourite sappy romances. A nearby tissue box confirmed that last suspicion. "No, no, Keith, the bigger ones," Mark shouted. "The ones the feds don't like, Dad." "Daddy?" I could hear Naomi's voice calling. "What's going on?" "Go back to your room, Sugar Plum, and stay away from the windows," Victor said adamantly. "Look, I think I saw one outside, Dad." Unless Keith had seen an owl, panic and nighttime misidentifications were setting in, which meant they would at least waste time jumping at shadows, or shooting at shadows. While I jimmied the frame, trying to pry open the window, bare feet pattered in the hall. Quickly, I ducked my head so that only my eyes and part of my horn were showing. The door slammed open, and a storm of red and pink burst in. If I were to be entirely honest, I would have to say that Naomi is prettier than I am, or prettier than I was before I became Mr. Ed's niece. Flouncing onto a dressing-table chair, she smoothed her pink nightgown, grabbed an ivory-backed brush, and pulled it through her hair, pouting ferociously. Naomi had princess-like hair, of which she was understandably vain, a great cascade of deep, metallic red curls that spilled all the way down her back. With it framing her heart-shaped face, she looked utterly adorable. If that look had not melted her father's heart, I must have given him a hell of a scare. Dipping my head lower, I hissed to carry through the glass. "Naomi!" I had been counting on a little squeak and wasn't disappointed. Naomi had always been rather soft-spoken. "Daphne," she called quietly. "Is that you?" "Yes, it's me, you ninny." My voice came out as a strained whisper. "Open the window." "You sound like you're in a snit," she complained, miffed. "What are you doing here? Aren't you worried about the alien? Wait, what's that banging?" I stopped pounding my head against the wall. "I am the alien. Please," I pleaded with her. Open the window and let me in." There was a pause from within, and I looked towards the kitchen to see if anyone was looking. There had been no gunshots yet, but every few minutes one of the boys shouted that they saw something, and it started a new flurry of activity. The barking dogs added to the clamour, which only improved things for me. "If you're really Daphne, then what's the most embarrassing thing that ever happened to her at school?" Briefly, I considered running right then. Surely there was an unattended phone somewhere. But no, not for a long while. I sucked in a breath. "When Bianca went through the trash and read my love poem to Henry Barker in the 8th grade. And I ran upstairs, climbed the ladder to the school tower, and shut myself up there for 13 hours. The fire department came and had to drag me off." "And?" she repeated, expectant. My teeth grated loudly. "Dad, there's an alien here," she said airily, as if she were practicing. "On the way down in the fire truck's bucket, I threw up over the side right on the police, reporters, and the mayor's wife." The latch clicked, and the window began sliding open. Knowing Naomi, the first thing she would do would be to stick her head out. "Naomi, wait," I said at once to stall her. "Don't look. Just step back into the room, and don't look until I say so." "Now you really sound like an alien trying to trick me," she muttered dubiously. "For crying out loud, if I were going to hurt you, I'd stick a tentacle in and pull you out now. Just turn around and wait, it's important. If you're lucky, I'm a sexy alien fugitive shapeshifter whom you can comfort." Okay. Shh. No alien like that would be this grouchy. "You really have a burr in your saddle tonight, Daphne," she complained, and I could almost hear her pouting as she moved over to another part of the room. Hauling myself up on the window-sill, I scrambled my rear hooves against the wall for purchase and trundled in awkwardly, my landing cushioned by a small mountain of plush toys. Hopefully, they wouldn't be too difficult to clean. I had always liked them as a little girl. For all we bickered, Naomi and I had been nearly as close as two friends could be since we were tiny. Maybe we were close because of all our quarrels, actually. A slender, pretty thing, she stood with her arms crossed, facing the corner and tapping a bare foot. I glanced about the room. The door latch was in a locked position as I had hoped, and it was harder to hear what was going on in the kitchen from here, especially once I had turned and shut the window behind me. Much as I wanted an escape route, I wanted to avoid being heard more. Shelves stocked with light fantasy literature, horse fiction, books on genuine horse care and ranching, and pictures of us growing up together lined the wall with the door. One wall, the one with the window I had come through, was devoted to her own not unskilled photography. Another had the door to a walk-in closet and a four-poster bed, and the last had her writing desk and her dressing table. Naomi's full-length mirror had been brought out to stand in a corner, and for the first time I glimpsed my new form. It was something of a miserable sight, possessed of a bedraggled white-brown coat and a head of wild blonde hair that stuck out every which way, while my equally blonde tail had twigs and leaves sticking out of it. I wasn't quite as tall as a modern pony, and there were many differences beside. Like leitmotif before me, I had big, expressive eyes and looked soft and pliable compared to any equine bred by humans. It was easy to imagine how she might have developed from a cute little filly to a cute little mare like me. What definition my muscles had was minimal, and, overall, I gave a harmless, sweet appearance that belied the fright Naomi's family was experiencing. Even my horn looked soft-edged and unthreatening. I blew out a frustrated breath in a horse-like nicker. Startled at the noise, Naomi disobeyed me and turned. For a long moment she stood transfixed. Stumbling back a half-step at her gaze, I became very aware of the fact that I had just sealed off my only escape route. In my imagination I already vividly saw her screaming and grabbing her chair to fend me off, which is why it caught me completely off guard when she flew through my mental image and tackled me to the wall. She hauled me up off the floor and proceeded to squeeze every last breath out of my body. Wheezing and waving my hooves uselessly, I tried to gasp a response, but she only hugged me tighter. "Finally!" Naomi cried. "Oh, I've been waiting so long for this!" "Gak!" I gasped eloquently as she began to dance around her small room with me in tow, trying to keep my balance. "I've been wishing and wishing and wishing for this to happen ever since you told me. A unicorn of my very own, my magical pony best friend forever, my very own MP BFF!" she squealed. nuzzling her cheek against my face. "Naomi," I choked, trying to get a word in edgewise. "Oh, we'll have so many wonderful and magical adventures together," she breathed in, wondering or she would let me flop down on the floor, coming down beside me and smoothing my mane and tail, plucking the twigs and leaves out. "You poor thing, we'll get you settled down with a nice stool and a bale of hay and some oats, maybe an apple or two, and I'll wash you and brush your mane and coat and tail, and it'll be so perfect, just like I've always dreamed." "Look, Naomi," I tried again, my throat clearer. She giggled obscenely, her cherubic face haloed in a cloud of red as she beamed at me. "Ever since you told me about your friend, I've been so jealous. I never stopped believing, and I've been out in that forest at least once a week since I was 7, trying to find leitmotif for you. And now you're a magical pony, and we're going to be the best friends forever." What? We weren't already best friends? What was I, the newer, shinier model? My mouth dropped open and I couldn't help but gape in astonishment. I wasn't sure whether to be touched that she had believed in me when no one else had, or else deeply concerned at the level she was taking this whole thing. At the moment, mostly the latter. "I think you're about 8 to 9 hands tall, which is pretty insignificant for a pony, but your neck goes almost straight up, so that gives you a lot more height of the crown," she continued, oblivious to my distress as she poked and prodded me, turning my head this way and that. "Your craniofacial morphology is really developed. The prominent eyes, the shortened snout, the enlarged cranium. You certainly have a brain at least as big as a human's. The gracile ridges and facial muscles indicate advanced social development." This spiel had me too stunned to object as she lifted one of my forelegs, examining the joints and muscles of the horse trader's professional grip. "Oh, neat! You're way more flexible than any pony I've ever seen. If it weren't for the hoof, I wouldn't be surprised if you could grip objects. You even have strong ellipsoid joints where the humans would be, just tougher to take impacts from walking." "How do you know so much?" I started, and then interrupted myself, looking at her shelf again. Riddle solved. Naomi reached for my tail, starting to lift it just under the dock. "So, do you have menstrual or Naomi!" I shrieked, skittering away with my tail held protectively behind me, staring at her. No! Bad girl!" Deciding I needed to settle this at once, I reared up and pressed her back to her bed with my hooves on her shoulders. "Naomi, please, for the love of all that's sane, listen to me," I begged her, my voice racing on. "I'm sorry, but I'm not here to be your magical special friend you've longed for since girlhood. I was in the forest with Illya and some monsters kidnapped her, and then I got hit with a magic wand and cursed into this shape." My voice throbbed with emotion as I laid out my tale for her, the events of the day compressing themselves into a tight knot in my throat. I was just out there with her, and we had a fight because I was being horrible," I told her, my eyes starting to swim with tears. "And she ran off when it was getting dark. And I was such an idiot, I let her go at first." I sucked in a breath as Naomi's face fell into increasing concern and horror. I told her about the strange men, the encounter in the grove with the cat, and my struggle for the wand. I told her about how I had pulled myself out of the river to discover my transformed state, and how I had nearly drowned or fainted from the cold, how I had run all the way from there to her ranch, and how I had nearly been caught by her father and uncle and the family dogs. At some point, I'm not sure when, I had started crying, tears running down my smooth cheeks. Naomi's arms went about my neck, and this time she held me to her gently. I felt her warmth against me, her form against mine. I wept like a child. This was another reason why Naomi was among my closest friends. Sure, she could be ridiculous and wimpy and fruity, and maybe a little scary at times, but when it was important, she knew how to put all that aside and be there for me. She was smarter than she seemed, and had a deep, kind heart full of laughter and love. I needed her then, and more than just for a phone. "Shh," she whispered, stroking my mane as I sniffled. She even got one of her spare brushes from a drawer nearby, and began running it through my hair. Half curled on her lap, my head against her chest, I must have looked an awful mess, pony or no. It was silly, but her ministration had helped spread a sense of calmness and lassitude through me. Funny to say, but we had brushed one another's hair before, and I always did find it comforting, particularly when I felt lonely or lost. "It's all right, Daph. I'm here." "Oh, Naomi," I breathed plaintively. "I don't know if Amelia's all right. I don't know if I'll ever be normal again. I don't know if it's given me cancer or if I'll lose my mind or anything." "You'll be okay. It'll work out. Does Em have a cell?" No. I closed my eyes. "Let's call the house, then. If she got away in the fight, she may be home already," she said with infectious optimism. It didn't matter whether it was faked or not. I nodded, and she pulled her smartphone out, scrolled through the contacts, and dialed my house, putting it on speakerphone. Just like her. A thoughtful little touch. The phone rang. It continued to ring on for a time. When it got to the voicemail, she hung up, frowning, and asked, "Shouldn't your parents have answered?" I shook my head against her. "Theatre. They won't be home for a while yet." "Okay, let's call the cops," she said, and I laughed softly. Just like her to guess my thoughts from time to time. She dialed the sheriff's line. A brief conversation later, a false name given, and she shook her head, hanging up. "They said they haven't picked up anyone of her description." Shakily I began to rise. "There's only one thing to it, then," I murmured, steeling myself. "I need to go to her land. To Equestria." The silence was deep. Even the family had calmed down, though I think they were still up, since I could hear dogs barking intermittently, and no one was stopping them. Naomi ran a hand through her hair and stood up. "Do you know how to get there?" she asked. "Maybe." I hesitated, thinking aloud. "I mean, Leitmotif told me a little about how she got here, but, I never really thought it important. It never occurred to me that Equestria was anything but another town at the time. But I know where she came from, and it's along the line where I met those things." "Okay," she said, and started to peel her nightgown off. I would never admit openly that I envied more than her pretty hair sometime, not to mention her total lack of shame. "Naomi, what are you doing?" I asked, sitting my rear down again. I felt like a cat doing that while bracing my upper body against my outstretched forelegs. It was very much not a normal pony thing, but, as Naomi had pointed out, I was definitely no earthly pony. "Going with you," she insisted, taking some ties from the dressing table and tying her clouds of flaming hair back into a bushy ponytail. "No," I protested, starting to stand. Wailing sirens rose outside, causing me to pause as my ears perked to the sound. I went to the window and saw a line of sheriff's cars charging up the road to the ranch. Naomi's uncle and cousins would already be scrambling to secrete away the heavier-duty firearms, while, I imagined in like fashion, the country sheriffs would be busy tackling me to the ground and hog-tying my legs. A thudding of feet in the hall alerted us both to trouble, and Naomi hissed, "Daph, back here!" She threw open the door to the walk-in closet, and I darted in without hesitation. It fell dark when she closed the door, but for the thin panes of light let in by the slats in the wood. The bedroom door swished open, and a figure entered the room. Of course he would have a key. I was such an idiot sometimes. Peeking through the slats as best I could, I saw Naomi scuff the twigs and leaves under her bed with a foot. "Daddy, I'm undressed!" she complained. "Sorry, Sugar Cube, I need to protect you before your modesty," Victor apologized as he peeked under the bed. "Dad, I think I would have noticed an alien in here." "Might have come in when you were in the kitchen. Scoot." He gestured her aside. I scrambled back, thinking fast. An idea occurred among the faintly perceived shapes around me as I backed up almost to the wall. When Victor opened the closet door and flooded the little room with light, I had braced myself amongst her backup plushies, including the largest of them, a pair of bears and 3 horses. I kept my head still, my body frozen, and my eyes wide and staring. It was an incredible effort not to blink or flinch, but I visualized it in my head. I was a unicorn plush, no different from any other, glassy-eyed and adorable for all that I was mussed. I probably looked slightly more stupid than the fluffy dog at my side, one that nearly dwarfed me. Victor stepped back to let more light flood in. I held my breath. The strain of stillness was cording my neck muscles intensely. At any moment, my mental image might have slipped, and with it my will to remain still. I wished I had taken a moment to wipe my coat where it had been wet, and begged the universe not to let him turn the closet light on. "Daddy!" Naomi growled, taking the universe's place for the evening. "This is ridiculous. There's no creepers, killers, or grey men in my closet. I'm also still undressed." Embarrassed, the man stepped out, running a hand through his short, reddish hair. "I'm sorry, Sugar Plum. You know I'm just worried about you." Yes, I know. Out! Out!" she demanded, and shoved him to the door. He may have been upwards of 200 pounds of muscle, but against Naomi he might as well have been 20. Banishing him beyond the threshold, she slammed the door again. I gasped a sigh of relief, but remained hidden until it seemed certain the danger had passed. I crawled out, looking up at her from the carpet, resigned. My ears drooped, and I shuffled my hoofs together awkwardly. "Settled then?" she asked, beaming. She was already filling one of her bags, regardless of my answer. "Settled," I sighed. "Ah, Naomi!" I complained, shutting my eyes and trying to cover my face as the jet from the hose smacked me in the nose. "Knock it off!" "You already tracked mud in my room, and I don't want you getting parasites," my friend insisted. I spluttered and glowered when she started to spray the rest of my body, looking not unlike a soggy kitten. She was dressed in her riding leathers, durable and easy to travel in. On a set of saddlebags resting on the stool, a sensible cowboy hat had been slung. It was astonishing how quickly she had packed and dressed. In my experience, it could take her hours to get ready for even the simplest trip. A small electric lantern illuminated the two of us, and a backup oil lamp was attached to a camping backpack. Groaning, I turned in a little circle, wanting to get it over with as soon as possible. Copious amounts of dust and grime sloshed off me to run along into the stable drain, while horses trying to sleep nickered softly. Somewhere outside on the other side of the farmhouse, the remaining sheriffs were combing the woods, aside from a pair talking to Victor and his wife, the quiet Tess. Naomi and I had waited until they had checked over the stables, and this side of the ranch before making our break, so we weren't too concerned about being caught. Completing my turn, I grunted as a wet sponge hit me. "Ugh! We don't have time for this." "Oh, relax, I didn't soap it, I'm just scrubbing the worst of it off. Besides, you shouldn't complain so much, you're absolutely gorgeous," Naomi said breathlessly, and I began to suspect her motives were not entirely altruistic. "I am not. This is a horrifying Kafkaesque transformation. I am not. Eh!" I squealed and jumped. "Stop nuzzling me at once." Naomi giggled wickedly and rinsed off the rest of the gunk, then started to dry me off with a big towel. I pushed her away and grabbed it in my hooves, backing up and using the side of the stable for balance. Though I still had no idea how or if I could pick things up with my hooves, it wasn't hard to hold a big towel and rub it against myself. Besides, I was becoming intimately aware of the fact that I was stark naked, coat aside, and Naomi wasn't making things any easier in that respect. "Can you sing now?" "What? No, why would you even ask that?" "Well, you know, magical pony best friends should sing, and you were always awful," she complained, reaching around behind her. "Knock it off, and hey, what are you doing with that?" Then came the brush, and fighting her off proved less successful this time. My friend came prepared, armed with her most devastating little girl pout, and I scuffed my hoof on the floor and snorted a reluctant agreement. Now that my hair and tail were reasonably clean and damp, the brush went through them easily. "Oh, it's a lot more like human hair, too. That's fascinating. It's interesting how you don't have a crest. I wonder why." "We can wonder why later. Come on, Naomi, you've brushed me enough. Stop it," I whined, pattering my feet. 20 strokes on my tail was quite enough, thank you. I gave her my most ferocious glare, which, in my present state, was more likely to be an adorable pout. Naomi confirmed this by squealing and hugging my head. "Oh, you are just so perfect," she crooned, and lifted a small hand mirror. Having no particular desire to see, I only reluctantly observed my reflection, and grudgingly had to admit that I looked a lot nicer. My hair was much like my own had been, a shiny mop of blonde that fell past my chin. A very fine coat of groomed pale hair covered my body, and my tail was a somewhat bushy golden colour. I supposed I'd have to admit that I looked a heck of a lot cuter than most horses too, but I certainly wouldn't do so in public. As I looked, Naomi started reaching for a bridle hanging on a hook on the wall. "Whoa!" I squawked, pinning it there with my foreleg. "What do you think you're doing?" "Oh!" She paused a beat. "I'm sorry, it was automatic," she then offered, though her hand remained frozen in place, still reaching for the headgear. I narrowed my gaze at her. That didn't sound entirely sincere. "Anyway," she evaded quickly, finally stepping away from the tackle, "let's get going." She slapped a set of small saddlebags on my back, and I let her cinch them. What was left of the belongings I had rescued were in them, and more room besides. "Right," I agreed. For all my complaints about time, there had been perfectly legitimate reasons for us to wait before taking off. The lights of the sheriff's wagons were only now beginning to roll out across the night, so it was risky to head out just yet. With the dry coat, I didn't feel the bite of the night air as I might have, and it was reasonable, if not comfortable, for me to stay out in the chill for a little while. Hearing shod hooves, I half turned and blinked at my friend. "Aren't we taking the truck?" I asked, watching as she smoothly mounted the saddled and bridled Hector. The big speckled stallion was restless, sensing the excitement of his rider, and chuffed at me. A quick step back prevented a repeat of the nuzzling incident earlier. Naomi stilled Hector with a casual touch and tucked stray flaming hairs out of the way, her hat on her head. It had a surprise at first when she started wearing entirely practical gear, but Naomi had made it perfectly clear that she thought cowgirl chic was entirely gauche. Besides, when asked, she responded truthfully that she thought the frontier ensemble looked good. "Uncle Mark passed out in the back with a bottle of rum and his favourite shotgun," she informed me, wrote, with a mirthless grin. "Unless you have a crane, we're going by hoof now." I arched a brow. "He has a favourite." Naomi gave a shrug. "He insists he loves them all equally, but everybody knows." That change in plans had me biting my lower lip in considerable thought. With my new body, I could eat up a lot of ground, and having ridden the path before, I knew we could get to my house within half an hour on horseback, if we were quick about it. More importantly, we'll be able to get out through the forest a lot quicker, I thought aloud. "Besides, you can't have an adventure without horses," Naomi declared vainly, her head held high and a self-assured grin on her lips. That left about a third of her library unaccounted for. "What about science fiction?" "Space horses," she answered gravely, eyes suddenly wide and determined, but her grin had straightened out only a little. Hector whinnied as if in agreement. "Fine. I'm not going to argue with both of you. Come on. We've got a road to hit," I announced, and put my hooves where my mouth was, moving into a steady trot towards the gates. An eager Hector joined me, restrained from his competitive instincts by Naomi's firm guidance. She had a small camera in hand and was filming me as we went, her knees guiding the big animal. The little coos and awes she made as I picked up the pace from a walk to a trot, or when I agilely dodged road obstacles, were getting very distracting. "I'm glad you're enjoying my discomfort." "Yeah, it's like a dream come true." There was no expressing in words how grateful I was for modern road lighting systems, and without having to worry as much about potholes or hidden routes, I devoured distance. Keeping up with the big stallion was proving my most trying experience. Hector clearly wanted to show who was the faster racer, and tiny little me couldn't possibly have kept up with a hot-blooded animal forged by thousands of years of directed breeding. The comparisons to be made between humans and great apes was very starkly evidenced here. I could no more have competed against him in a race than I could have wrestled a gorilla as a human. On our way, I kept to the far side of the larger animal, away from the street, as we jogged along the horse trail. It wasn't a perfect cover, but it was unlikely the occasional car speeding along would notice me beside the bigger animal, and the last thing I wanted was for people to start swooping around town with Instagrams of an alien on Twitter and Facebook. When we passed a gas station, the very idea of food had my stomach threatening to revolt, demanding sustenance. Suddenly, that offer of hay and oats didn't seem quite so out of line. While I started to contemplate whether or not grazing on the grass beside the road was a good idea, Naomi perceived my plight and took pity. Of course, my stomach was growling loud enough that she should have heard it clearly. "Let's get a bite to eat," she suggested. We were within the town now, if on the fringes of it, and we had to watch out to make sure we could pass through unnoticed. "What sort of places are open this late?" "I guess we can get some fruit or something from a 7-Eleven, I commented. I would have to eat vegetarian, of course. Light never even liked looking at my hamburgers, though she devoured ice cream, so I supposed I could at least get dairy. "It's only 20 to 9. I know a place," Naomi assured me. I marvelled at the time as she turned Hector and started trotting down a tree-lined lane. What had felt like days in my mind had only been 3 or 4 hours. The thought had settled me, and weariness seeped into my bones. Never one for vegetarian food, I didn't recognize the dinner, and I kept well back from the main road in any case. Concentrating on her goal, Naomi failed to notice my depression, and I preferred it that way. I wanted to be alone with my thoughts just then. Slumping with my head low and a deep scowling pout on my lips, I watched the shoppers and diners going about their business. Late as it was, there weren't many, but there was still a sense of separation between them and me. They were human. Each and every one of them had a life here. Work, school, families. There was no way I could go back to school like this. There was no telling what Mother and Father would do to me, even if I did manage to find Emilia. There was nothing left of their oldest daughter, of the old Daphne. There wasn't a place for me here. I couldn't even drown my sorrows in a stacked quarter-pounder and cheese. No, all I had was a horn sticking out of my forehead, my naked coat, and a too-eager friend who probably wanted me to stay like this for the rest of my life. Hector pawed at the ground of the hoof where he had been left. My brow furrowed further, tears beating in the corners of my eyes as I glanced his way. "Yeah, look at you, big guy," I snarked, pushing back my grief with biting sardonicism. "She steps on your reins and you stay right where you are. Yeah, you're a big wuss, aren't you?" I sounded pathetic. Naomi found me curled on the ground, my head between my forelegs, and my tail tucked around my side. I looked up and she bit her lip, apparently trying to keep from bursting into tears at the sight of me right then. She could be such a sap. Showing surprising tact, she simply laid a streaming bag down beside me and stepped away to munch on her own. In spite of my growing depression, it was impossible to remain entirely upset amid such intoxicating aromas and a growling stomach. Nosing the bag open, I snuffed inside with my big muzzle. "Processed mushroom burger," Naomi informed me. "Oats, garlic, onion, parsley, oregano, pickles, all in a wheat bun. I know how much you like cheese, so I had them shred parmesan all over it, even though it's going to go right to your hips." My mouth watered and I shoved my face in, tore the wrapping away with my teeth, and scarfed up the burger with delight. It was no beef, but with mayo and dressing and cheese and meaty mushroom and everything else, it was like a chunk of heaven all the same. To a starving mare who had not eaten anything since before noon, it was as if life had begun anew. If not for the bag, I would have been spraying juices across the grass like we were on the set of a horror film. I didn't even need to ask for more before she put the cheesy fries down next, and I inhaled them in great gulps. "Oh," I moaned. "Salt and grease and cheddar." It was nearly obscene. I should have been embarrassed to enjoy myself this much in public. Naomi giggled, pecking at a salad, while Hector tried to steal a bite. She shoved his big head away. "Later, you. I brought plenty of oats." He settled for nuzzling at her mane of red hair instead. "Are you feeling— Oh my God, that is so cute!" she squeaked, watching me suck up a milkshake through a straw, my face puckered up. "You are going to be just impossible, aren't you?" I asked around the straw, unwilling to stop eating. "I don't know how I'm going to make it through the night." It was difficult to tell if she was being sarcastic or not, fanning herself with a plastic fork in hand. "I'm already melting into a puddle of joy." Gagging noises told her what I thought of that. Naomi gave me a grin. "Oh, don't ruin it. You're so much cuter this way. Really, Daphne, you can be a bit of a snit. You should take this chance to look at life from a new perspective. This is plenty perspective enough for me right now, thanks. And I am not that bad." "Daph!" Naomi planted a fork-holding hand against her hip as she regarded me. "You've been like a bear with a sore paw for a while now. Even before you broke up with Mark, you acted like you barely had time for anyone." My first instinct was to snap back at her, rising to do exactly that, but it would have merely proven her point. Falling back to my milkshake, I allowed a moment to pass so I could take stock. "I know, and I'm sorry. I've been pretty unfair to people lately. Self-obsessed, perhaps?" "Don't push it," I grumbled. Shaking my head, I huffed a sigh. This was really the first time I had been able to sit and think since the discoveries of tonight, and since we were here eating anyway. It seemed a waste not to get a load off with my best friend, much as I had been reluctant to earlier. Who knew when we'd be able to sit down again to talk? It's been that way ever since I gave up on leitmotif. How much do you know of what happened back then? I know I didn't tell you, well, anything after a certain point. Naomi shook her head. "Not much, no. Father told me you were getting help from a therapist, and then you started acting pretty strangely after that. Don't you remember when I broke into your room to complain about how you weren't talking to me anymore?" That startled me. I had forgotten about that, but now that she had reminded me, I could remember waking up in the middle of the night to a cloud of red hair and angry, crying eyes. Strange, the sorts of things that get lost in the dust of memory. Nodding, I said, "You thought I didn't like you anymore. This may sound funny, but I honestly thought that you hated me. Because of the other kids' parents. You know my parents aren't like that, Daphne. They'd never have told me to stay away from you. They knew you, for one, and they thought you were just acting up because you were afraid." She closed the distance between us, dropping her fork into her tray as she walked, and reached out to stroke her hand along my mane. "Besides, I believed in you. Seems that panned out better than any of us expected, too." "You're a sap, and I hope you get carried off by a dragon," I griped, but gave her hand a quick nuzzle. "Depending on how cute he is, I might not object too strongly," she said, giggling. Stealing some of Naomi's salad, I washed it down with another gulp of my milkshake. "You may be more right than you think, though," I admitted at last. Not about the transformation giving me a new perspective, though, so much as it is the whole thing. I tried to put all of that away because I thought that it was hurting me, that it was unreal, and I couldn't tell the difference. "Now you know it's real," she said, pushing the rest of her salad my way. "You don't have to be afraid of being yourself anymore, Daph." It was gobbled up gratefully, and I finished off my milkshake before pushing all the trash into the burger bag. Wiping my mouth was a challenge, but I managed to hold a pile of napkins between my hooves and used those to mop up my muzzle. "Being myself," I mumbled. "I'm not sure I know how to do that anymore." Her hands lifted my face, and she cleaned off a speck that I had missed on my cheek before sliding her hands down to my hooves and giving them a squeeze. It should have felt belittling, but Naomi had something of a gift when it came to tender devotion. No one else had ever been able to soothe my hurts quite like her, and I never let anyone touch or even hug me quite like she did. It was exactly the sort of affection I needed just then. Closing my eyes, I exhaled, letting a portion of my worries go. "Let's get going," I said, and reached back to nose into my saddlebags. Naomi put her hand to my neck as I pulled out my wallet, giving me a gentle push to let me know I didn't have to pay her back. I reluctantly put it away and snorted, scuffing my hoofing on the ground awkwardly. Nothing was said. We both understood. I chucked the diner bag into a public trash can and hurried on. Mounting up on Hector, Naomi turned to follow me as I led the way. Home awaited me. If I could still call it home. Even taking the back ways, it was only another 5 minutes to my house at our pace. A hill ran along behind the row of homes, and the thick bed of leaves squished under our hooves as we rode up to the backyard. Dodging around toys left there by Amelia, I walked up to the back porch and surmounted the stairs, my eyes and ears swiveling as I searched to be sure that no one was watching. Other homes glowed with light, but ours was dark, and no one who wasn't expressly looking into our backyard would have seen the 2 horses and young girl approaching. Leaving Hector at the base of the steps, Naomi joined me and unlatched the gate. My keys were presented to her in my mouth, and she popped open the back door while I judiciously scraped my hooves clean on the rug. So doing, I entered. Were it not for our lack of supplies, I might have bypassed this trip entirely. While Naomi had been able to take some food for Hector, and me, technically, food for a human was decidedly lacking in a stable, and someone would have noticed her sneaking into and out of the kitchen. That same overwhelming sadness washed over me again, however, as we entered my home. Pictures of the family stared down from the walls and cabinets, and I didn't need to stretch my imagination much to imagine them glaring at me in disapproval. Who was I but a weird little interloper now? I wasn't even of the same flesh as my kin any more. One who had lost her one and only sister. While Naomi saw her way about the pantry, I went upstairs. The steps weren't hard to take, my legs were pretty versatile, and most of the night had been spent getting used to them. I noticed the door open to Amelia's room, and padded around in the dark like a fuzzy burglar. Laying my head on her bed for a moment, I sighed. "I'll get you back," I promised the empty room before opening my eyes. 2 blue gleaming eyes stared back at me over a forked tongue, and I jumped back, startled. It became apparent, looking closer, that it was just Amelia's favorite toy, a white snake plush named Asmodeus, slayer of mice. My sister had always been a little weird. It would be pathetic if I started bawling like a little girl right there. Just started tearing up and sniffling and hugging a toy to my chest and crying my little heart out. I wouldn't be that pitiable. Once I was done not being that pitiable, I put Asmodeus into a saddlebag and went back into the upstairs hallway. There were other things we were going to need, so I went into my room next. A flick of my tail clicked the light switch on with its tip, which was pretty fun actually. A tail could come in handy now and then, it seemed. That was worth a grin at least. Opening the closet, I pushed aside a stack of books and dragged a box out with my mouth. There was a tag on the cardboard slats that read, "Sealed forever." "Okay, Daphne," I murmured to encourage myself, putting a hoof on top of it. "It's just another part of the past you tried so hard to bury. You know, how a therapist and your parents convinced you that you were crazy? That part Naomi said it was okay for you to have now." I looked up into the mirrored surface of my closet, at the wide green eyes of a unicorn. Long seconds passed as I drank in the reality. I shoved the top of the box in, and broke the seal with a slice of my hoof, prying the 2 sides open and freeing the contents within. Memories poured out, filling the air with dusty reminiscence. A laughing, happy little girl, full of life, bounced on the bed. Action figures, army men, and playsets sprawled across the floor, while she envisioned titanic battles and elaborate romances playing out across time and space contained in the impossibly vast universe of my bedroom. She hung upside down and watched Star Wars on a little TV and VHS player, until she knew the whole series backwards. I could see every little freckle on her as she put together a model airplane on her desk, a magnifying lens swelling her face into immensity. "Pandora, eat your heart out," I mumbled, digging through the boxes as more memories danced around me. I tried not to focus on the toys, knowing I could be here all night, reliving my childhood, if I let myself. Instead, I fit my hooves in and pulled out a camo-textured case. A solid, sensible survival kit freshly stocked in anticipation of my next and greatest adventure. One I'm about to make 8 years late. "What was that?" Naomi asked from the door, and I jumped, automatically shoving the kit into my empty saddlebag, as if I were hiding something shameful. "Oh. Hey, is that your hoth play set? I wondered where that had gone." I just wanted to get some things," I stammered, busying myself with my saddlebag for a moment. I closed the box, but I wouldn't have sealed it again even if I had the tape to do it with. I didn't want to bury my childhood ever again. Still, there was nothing to do but shove it back into the closet with my head for now. It would have to wait until I had finished something far more important. "Do you think any of these would fit?" Naomi said, starting to leaf through my clothing with her normal cavalier manner towards my stuff. "Well, my panties burst right off, and I don't know what happened to my earrings." I snorted and shook my head. My clothes weren't fitting right when I got out of the river. "That doesn't mean nothing here will. And what if it's cold over there? You don't want to freeze?" "Is this a thinly veiled excuse to dress me up?" I asked, my eyes narrow as I hopped up on my bed and crossed my forelegs in front of me. "No," she said, after half a beat, her expression blank as she approached me with a hat. "Put this on." Reluctantly I submitted, for her excuse was reasonable. I might have had a warm coat, and running warmed me up pretty well, but I obviously wasn't immune to cold. As a pouty pony clothes horse, I was a distressingly marketable little thing, which Naomi's giggling and carrying on proved. My closet served as a full-length mirror, and I shrugged into various different shirts and jackets and skirts. Nothing in that vein fit, and I rebelled when I saw Naomi's camera resting on my desk, taking in the whole thing. Dragged back in by my rear ankles, I groused, but let her adorn me with hats and combs. What did end up working was a rain poncho and some of my winter scarves, as well as a small selection of knit caps. It was hard to keep from giggling at the sight of myself. If I wasn't careful, I might start to like looking like this. We packed away the poncho on top of the wrapped-up scarves and hats. One saddlebag was nearly full, and so I endeavoured to fill the other by heading downstairs and finding where Naomi had laid out the food. She turned out the lights upstairs and went to root through the rest of the building in search of anything else useful. Spying some cans and other packages of ready-to-eat food on the kitchen table, I packed my remaining bag by the simple expedient of putting a foreleg on the table and sweeping the lot off at the edge, then packing it in. Safety was soon to die, however, when I heard the crunch of tires on asphalt, and headlights swept over the big kitchen window. I gaped and stared at the digital clock on the microwave. "No, it's only 9:20. What are you doing home early?" I demanded of the air uselessly. "Come on, Daph, I've got to go." Naomi barked at me from the stairs. Much as having to comically flee from well-meaning persecutors for yet another time tonight would have been par for the course, I shook my head. No, they'll freak out if they hear someone pounding away, or if they come home and find Em and I aren't here. We need to... I hesitated, tossing a trailing end of my dragon-patterned scarf over my neck. A car door slammed and I could see bags. That explained the earliness. If Father's reflux was acting up, he would have just gotten some takeout. It might have been a good sign if he was too annoyed to pay attention to things, or argue with his daughter and her friend. I retreated to the family room in the back, Naomi at my heels. "We're going to have to trick them, or they'll never sleep right and call the police besides." "Oh, a distraction, fun!" She clapped her hands gleefully and went off to the entryway. "Naomi!" I hissed, but could only dance on my hooves helplessly as she ran off. The door opened and I heard my mother ask, her tone surprised, "Naomi? What are you doing here?" "Hey, Mrs. O," Naomi said brightly. "Nice to see you too." Taking advantage of her distraction, I went out back, picking up my saddlebags and... My mouth snapped on empty air. Crap! I had left them in the kitchen, and forgotten to take them with me when I ran back here. "Yes," Mother responded cautiously. "It's nice to see you too. Where is Daphne?" I could hear her jewellery tapping against the stand in the entryway as I darted across the family room to the kitchen, vaulting the coffee table. I had to skid to a halt with all four legs splayed ahead of me when the light there came on, flooding the tiled room with illumination. "Around. She and I just came by for a couple things." "A couple things? Just you two?" Mother asked, her heels clicking on the hardwood. I carefully peeked and saw Father putting boxes in the fridge. My mouth watered involuntarily. I saw a cake among those boxes, a cake neither I nor Amelia would be trying. "Yeah, Amy and Daph stopped by my place, and Amy was so tired she just fell over on my bed and didn't want to get up." Naomi lied, with the effortless grace only a true daddy's girl could muster. "I figured they'd stay the weekend. It's okay with Mum and Dad. We never have enough people around." It was no difficulty at all to picture Mother giving Naomi a sour look, her hands on her hips. She would look so elegant in one of her evening gowns with her blonde hair swept up. I ignored the image, and crept forward with remarkable stealth for someone with hard hooves, picking the bags up in my mouth. "Daphne?" Father asked, and I nearly jumped out of my skin right then. I looked, but his face was concealed by the open fridge door. Shrugging under the strap so that the bags rode on my back, I answered, yes, Dad? I had to step softly to leave, lest the noise attract his attention, watching the refrigerator as if it contained a slavering ooze monster that was about to burst out and devour me. You make sure Amelia doesn't get hurt out there, all right? Oh, Father, of all the things to ask. Yes, Daddy, I promised, my throat tight, and ran as soon as my hoofs touched carpet. Fleeing back over the coffee table, I pushed through the back door and took off across the backyard. I heard Naomi coming after me as I slid down the hill, and when she leapt onto Hector's back, we took off at once towards the forest, leaving my home and my family behind me. Through the Well of Pirene by Ether Echoes. Chapter 3. Over the River. A whip for the horse, a bridle for the donkey, and a rod for the fool's back. Proverbs, chapter 26, verse 3. Amelia. I couldn't bear it any more. It was awful. Darkness was everywhere. My skin felt covered in pins and needles. Aches shot up my muscles from being held so still. My head throbbed. There was no worse agony than what I was going through right now. "Can I look now?" I begged, still holding my eyes shut.
In just a moment more, wee bear.
The Morgwyn's sandy voice breathed my way, as patient as the stars.
Keep the eyes shut and abide.
If there was anything worse in the whole world than having to wait and do nothing, I didn't want to know about it. Before, I had been certain that waiting for the dentist was the worst torment anyone could come up with. But I had to come down on this new torture now. Waiting for someone to do real magic was way, way harder. Worse, the Morgwyn was right in front of me every time I tried to peek, so there was no relief there. I twisted and started to hum the theme to my favorite show, hoping that would speed things up as I rocked back and forth on my feet. Little bangs and irritated voices were audible at the edge of my hearing, and I was getting frustrated. I opened my mouth, setting myself. "Okay, I'm going to open my eyes whether you like it or not."
Why did you not do so before, bear?
It asked, in that infuriatingly calm voice.
The Morgwyn only asks of you. Do you do all that is merely asked of you?
Stamping my foot, I opened my mouth to give the cat thing a good tongue lashing. Once my eyes were open, however, whatever bitter comment I had prepared died on my lips as they widened into an astonished and soundless "Oh." Laying like a glittering river of gold, a path of shiny yellow bricks stretched into the distance. Lamps placed to either side, much like the curved and twisty one back in the woods, curled over the path, and lent the whole thing a gentle glow that made it seem so unearthly in the night. Without my realizing it, an entire stagecoach had materialized before me as well. It made me jump back in surprise upon discovering it, having nearly bumped my nose into the thing as I turned about, taking in the golden road. The coach had arrived so stealthily that I hadn't heard its approach, or else it had simply appeared there out of thin air. There were no horses or engines mounted to the front. One of the strange men from before was sitting anxiously on the driver's step. I frowned at this, somewhat concerned. He looked different this time, wearing a rich, thick suit of black embroidered in gold. With his bowler hat, the effect was more charming than his raggedy old garb from before had allowed. Perhaps I had been unfair when I thought he and the others like him looked dangerous. What if they had been protecting me from that strange, screaming creature? Flashes of that barely-seen attacker came to mind. Before anything had really happened, the Morgwyn had snatched me up by my saddle's strap and hauled me away to safety, but the sounds of the fight had been pretty brutal. With a smile, I looked around, brushing at some fireflies that tried to settle in my hair. "It's like a page from a storybook." "'Tis your story, lass," another of the men said, opening the door to the inside of the coach. He had on the same outfit as the other one before him, though his head had a bandage wrapped around it. "Oh, you poor head!" I exclaimed in mock concern. "Did that horrible monster hurt you badly?" Without giving any warning, I tugged his big head lower, and pecked the fresh bandages, giggling.
"You must have been very brave getting that wound. You should be proud."
He blushed, as I knew he would, and doffed his cap to scratch at his mud-coloured hair. "Well, it was nothing," he mumbled. I grinned wider. A little flattery butters any adult up. Another hand hauled him aside, the third of the large men appearing and giving the injured one a sour look. My eyes were instantly drawn to the length of gnarled wood he had left inside the carriage, leaning against the back wall, but it wasn't glowing or doing anything special at the moment. It seemed deceptively innocent as it lay there, though I distinctly remembered its owner lighting up the entire woods with it before. After the Morgwyn, it was the first real magic I had seen. "My lady," he offered, trying to smooth his rough voice out, and touching the tip of a top hat atop his head. "If you will join us, your castle awaits. We can carry you to it forthwith." That blanked out everything else, my attention snapping to him.
"A castle?" I asked breathlessly. "With murder holes and crenellations and everything? I want to see the murder holes first."
The man blinked at that, apparently surprised, and pulled his friend aside for a quick, whispered conference. The Morgwyn chortled and stretched its wide shoulders before reaching up to snap a firefly out of the air with one gleaming claw, snuffing the insect's light. Each of the three men murmured amongst themselves in hushed tones, the man with the head wound blinking rapidly, the man with the fancy cloak grumbling in a gravelly voice, the man with the wand gesticulating wildly, and each of them glancing at me now and then. "Yes," the wand wielder agreed after his discussion, turning to me. "Lots of those things. It's powerful enchanted, too. Loads of magical creatures, proper tidy it is."
"Is there a magical ice queen who turns people to stone?"
"We got a king," the man with the head wound informed me proudly, his broad, flat-toothed grin excited. "He's mighty powerful." The other man cuffed him, and he yelped, looking miffed. "Yes, well, you'll meet him good time. If when you play your cards right, you might get to meet a princess or two," Wand Wielder informed me, and that was good enough for me. I hopped in and started bouncing on the seats. They were soft leather, but just firm enough to be satisfyingly springy. The injured one went to stand on the step. The Morgwyn, on its way in, gave him a very sharp-looking smile before sitting at my feet between me and Wand Wielder. He prudently lifted his feet to keep them out of the cat's way, while I stuck my head out the window like a dog. As the driver flicked his riding crop, the carriage jolted and moved of its own accord, forcing me to grip the window frame to stay steady. "Doesn't even pause to admire the scrollwork in here," Wand Wielder muttered under his breath, low enough that I didn't think I was supposed to hear, but I ignored him. I was admiring the scenery, and trying to find out how the cart worked. There was no engine noise, and no clopping of invisible hoofs, and it felt as if the wheels were moving of their own accord. As the carriage began to clatter along the stones, I heard the creaking and groaning of wood and whipped my head to peer the way we had come. Though it was hard to see, I swear the trees along the path were getting up and moving. It was as if they had come apart into blocks, then reassembled to bar the path, forming a thick line of foliage.
"Hey, what's going on back there? Why did they block the path?"
"So the monster can't find us again," Wand Wielder assured me, touching the narrow length of wood I had named him after as if for his own peace of mind. He shifted in his seat, and leaned against the frame, which was, in fact, inlaid with some pretty intricate scrollwork. Pretty carvings weren't that interesting, though.
"Oh, that makes sense,"
I said, and went back to staring out at the path. Fireflies flew up in great clouds of light in our wake, and the trees grew closer together, more tightly knit. The coach picked up speed, and I felt the wind of its passage blow my hair back, moving faster and faster. It wasn't a car ride, certainly, but it was pretty fast. Back inside, Wand Wielder was watching me with his lidded eyes in a curious gaze.
"What's up?"
I asked him, turning back inside the carriage. Smoothing my hair back from my forehead, I tucked it into my hoodie. He glanced up at the ceiling, answering, "Mahogany, by the look of it." That earned him an eye roll.
No. I wanted to know what was on your mind."
"Seems I recalled human girls being a little more retiring than you, lass." He frowned at me. Retiring? I didn't know whether to be offended or baffled. I settled to distract it instead.
"Amelia, Not lass.
Okay. That made him lean back, giving me a steady look. Really, you'd think he'd be easier to catch off guard. Actually, now that I paid attention to him, he seemed to be extremely nervous. Not only was he clutching his wand like it was a live hand grenade, he was also fiddling with his coat in a way that suggested he wasn't used to the fit. Something that lay ahead was leaving him unsettled.
So,
I began to ask, plopping back down into my seat, what do you mean by human girl?
if you aren't a human, what are you? Or is it just a funny way of saying you're a guy and I'm a girl?
Why, I'm a goblin, of course. Isn't it obvious? He exclaimed. The look he gave me was not very flattering.
Like from The Hobbit?
What? What's a... No, never mind. We're goblins, us three, he informed me proudly, thumping his chest. A proud and noble kind. He settled back, apparently intending to leave it at that, but I gave him my best wide-eyed look out of interest. After a moment his resistance faltered, and he continued. We serve the great kings. We're the best minions anyone could ask for.
Great kings?
I asked, wide-eyed. Wand-wielder coughed, as if he had something in his throat. He banged on the wall behind him, the one with the driver's seat, and the carriage picked up in speed, rocking hard on the rough road. We took a turn fast enough to smush me against the wall, and I could see a river running alongside us. I had to grip the frame hard, not to fly forward when the carriage stopped. The door opened, and I sprang out, excited, looking for the castle.
Hey, I protested. What gives?
The river spread out before us, reflecting the moon's glow in gleaming silver sparks. There was no castle in sight, the road simply ending at the water. The forest on the other side was different, with leafy fronds and no pines to be seen. Above all, however, there were no castles, kings, nor princesses of any stripe. The castle lies just down that road, but you can't go just yet, the injured one told me, hopping down off the cab step.
Why?
I queried, looking down to the river.
It doesn't look that swift.
I took a step towards it, preparing to make a leap. The goblin yelped and grabbed my arm, shouting, No! He hauled me back a step, panting. Be more than my head's worth to let you do that. It looks calm now, but it'll sweep you away in an instant if you can go as you are.
As I am?
I asked, miffed. What? Was I too dirty? I surreptitiously snipped at my armpit.
No son nor daughter of mortal man may cross the threshold of sanctum land.
The Morgwyn purred, slinking up along a fallen log over the river. It trailed a paw in the water, bringing up sparkling droplets. Each looked as though they had a tiny moon contained within them. I reached for the water myself in curiosity, but then stopped, the cryptic warning making me hesitate.
Whatever that means, how am I supposed to get across to see the castle? I asked. And why can't humans go across?
Rising, I turned to look at the goblins. The stagecoach had been pulled up to the end of the road, and all three goblins were together. The tallest, wand-wielder, held his namesake in hand. The gnarled wood hummed softly. Got that covered. Rules laid down in the old times are funny in a way. They don't brook disagreement, but they're very particular about wording. Electric blue fire curled up the wand as he spoke, and before I could really frame an objection, he had pointed the end at me. That fire filled my vision. The blast had tossed me aside like a rag doll. Stars danced around me as I came to, trying to pick myself up off the ground, but my legs weren't working properly. Somehow I rolled onto my back and managed to sit myself upright, but my struggles were largely useless. It felt as though I was being squeezed, like a bunch of giant rubber bands had been wrapped around me, and were pulling in every direction. There was an incredible feeling of heat, a baking sensation that started in my bones and radiated outwards. It felt as though there should have been incredible pain, that my blood should have been sizzling under my skin like a pork sausage. Pressure built. My head felt swollen, and I flopped my hands at my face, trying to feel what was wrong. I stared in shock, realizing at once why I had trouble standing up. My fingers weren't coming apart. They were squished together so tightly they were trembling and white, and I felt them squeezing tighter still in defiance of biological possibility. The flesh there bulked up, starting to swell alarmingly, red and angry with inflammation. Tiny hairs sprouted rapidly, covering my mutating hands in a soft fuzz that turned a creamy beige. It failed to cover my nails, which were turning a similar shade of beige as well, and melting together like wax. There was a twisting in my gut, and I keeled over. My spine buckled, deciding that it didn't really like sitting up. Bones cracked noisily, sending weirdly painless jolts throughout my body. Sick gurgling noises and an alien sensation of pressure signaled my guts shoving themselves around. An attempt to stand up again on my numb legs was cut short when a totally wicked snap echoed up from my hips, making my legs flop uselessly behind me as I lay on my belly. Shoulders popped and rotated forcibly, pushing my arms under me even as they grew shorter and stubbier. Somewhere at my backside I could feel a cramping at my rear, followed by what could only be described as a peculiar tingling, itching sensation, like someone was drawing a needle out. Next came an awful sense of compression. The invisible bands around me tightened and pulled harder, hauling until I felt as though blood should have squirted out over the road, eliciting a plaintive groan that echoed up from my burning lungs. All around me the world seemed to grow, as if the goblins in the carriage were growing taller rather than me growing shorter. The clothes on my body swallowed me up, and tangled my shortened limbs, as my neck inched forward, pushing my head out from my body. Pressure built up around my nose and mouth, changing up the tenor of my whimpers. With my sinuses swollen and impassable, I had to breathe noisily through my mouth, even as it changed. A hot, steamy breath poured out with each uncomfortable gasp. Rolling my eyes down, I found a snout where my mouth should have been, my nostrils pushed to either side as the little hairs grew into a thick coat. My ears twitched of their own accord, and I realized that they had moved without my notice. They flopped this way and that before going uncomfortably erect, straining. Even as my body cooled and hope rose that it might be the end of the ordeal, there was one final step. It was as if someone had taken a ball to my skull, grinding away skin, muscle, and bone to find the juicy brains beneath. There the sensation settled, swirling around and thickening until it formed a tight knot. That lump then began to grow, pushing out. For once, there was a spike of pain, but not in the same sense that someone might describe a cut or a prick. It was like listening to an audio spike so loud it stings, a burst of static so powerful you just want to cover your ears and hide. The noiseless knot sound built up around my forehead, rising in pitch until it mercifully passed out of my perception entirely, the throbbing ache fading with it. When the power that had gripped me faded at last, I lay on my belly and gasped for air for a few moments. There should have been sweat puddling underneath me from all the heat, but the air stirred hair that was cool and dry. The aches went away with the stiffness, the angry swelling fading as if it had never been. Squirming, I freed myself from my clothing and found my footing. All 4 legs, yes, 4, were as wobbly as a newborn foal's. My braid hung down one side, riding over my shoulder and dangling to my new knees. "Whoa!" I breathed, my eyes huge. With little clopping noises accompanying my new hooves as I turned a circle, I got a good look at myself. Soft beige hair covered nearly every inch of me, and behind me swished a long fluffy blonde tail that arched high and then fell to the earth, nearly touching it. Stubby legs ended in hard hooves I could feel tapping against the golden bricks. I peeked up between my bangs to see a short pale horn sticking through them. Now, try not to be angry, Bandages began, raising his hands apologetically.
Sweet flaming asteroids, I'm a unicorn!
This
is so cool!
I shouted. I bounded excitedly, hopping along on all 4s around the increasingly befuddled goblins.
And Mum told me magic wasn't real.
Eat it, Mum! I told you wishing on stars would work eventually. The Morgwyn barked a coughing laugh while the goblins exchanged glances. One wielder jerked his head to the stagecoach, and driver and Bandages returned to their places with the latter holding the door open. I hopped back in and settled on the seat, laying on it like a cat might, a grin nearly splitting my face. Getting used to 4 legs wasn't difficult at all. Outside, spray shot up from the wheels as the coach shot across the river, carrying me forward to whatever lay beyond. "So what other things can you do with that wand?" I asked, tucking my tail around me and running a hoof through it, reveling in the sensation of an alien limb. The hairs were soft but stiffer than my mane, giving them a curiously silky smooth texture.
Can you turn big sisters into bugs? Because I know someone who would be improved immensely by that. I would also accept snakes, crocodiles, or arachnids, but not daddy longlegs. That would be weird.
Why would?
Because it has daddy in the name, duh. Can you do dragons? No, wait, that would be way too cool for her.
I trailed off, trying to think of a good species of serpent. Trees blurred by in our passage, replaced by views of a dark sky with low mobile clouds. Far away, catching silvery moonlight, stood the thick, squat towers of Castle Keep. We raced towards it, taking a winding road through misty woods. This, I told myself, is going to be awesome. The moon hung fat and yellow behind the castle towers as I strode towards the gates, my head held high, and my hooves striking the paving stones proudly. Silhouettes of windmill blades, protruding from the castle turrets, and all around us upon towers and rooftops of dimly lit homes, rotated lazily against the night sky. A stone bridge spanned us a great canyon, and an enormous water wheel turned at the cliffside where a waterfall washed down into the depths. A crooked arch held the great gates, and the Morgwyn waited by the ugly bird-headed gargoyles overlooking the bridge, the cat monster's blue eyes gleaming in the dark. One wielder pounded on the door while I looked around curiously. I glanced up and a little dust fell near me, and I could have sworn the gargoyles had shifted to stare down at me. A slot in the gate slammed open, allowing a pair of jaundiced eyes to glare out at my escort. "What?" an older woman's voice demanded, raspy and annoyed. "Who is it?" "Fetter, is that you? What hour do you call this?" "We're here with a girl, Doris," Fetter announced, with a note of pride. It had never occurred to me that one wielder might have had a name, but I supposed if an awesome cat monster had one, it only stood to reason. I sat on my haunches and watched this exchange curiously. It was becoming increasingly obvious that something odd was going on, though they all seemed friendly enough. The eyes swiveled to look at me, and then back to Fetter. "A little late, aren't we? I seem to recall the king telling you not to come back. Lots of fireworks involved with it." Her raw voice chuckled. "Unless I heard the girl," he hissed in return, glancing at me. "You know, a special guest." I beamed back. "It's more than my head is worth to let you in on a false positive, Fetter. That could be any pony fool," Doris answered. "Swear it, she's a human. Fits it to every possible measure." He gestured my way, sweeping his hand. "Just look at her closely, it all fits." The yellow eyes turned towards me again, narrowing slightly. "Well," the dry voice conceded, grudgingly. "The hair's the right color. So's the eyes. Right smell, too." "I do not smell," I objected, stamping a hoof, but they ignored me. "I dunno, Fetter. It all looks like her, nice and tidy, but it's been a while. How fast do humans grow?" "Not sure, honestly," he admitted, arching a brow. "It hasn't been all that long." "Hey!" I shouted, this time getting their attention as I stood up. "I'll have you know I have a 10th grade reading level." They chewed over that one, pulling back into huddled conference by the door. I perked one of my ears, listening in as well as I could. "Can you read?" "No. Little, I mean, what's a... Get the form and... Can't just do it." They turned back towards me, and I feigned innocence, inspecting my forehoof for scratches. A heavy sigh emitted from the door, and Doris spoke. All right. Mark me though, Fetter, this ain't my fault if it goes pear-shaped." "Just tell everyone to get ready," he hissed at her. The slot slammed shut, and I waited. The night had so far been a jerky mixture of surprises and odd, confused pauses. On the one hand, or hoof, it was pretty clear by now that these goblins didn't entirely have it together. On the other hoof, though, it was still a magical land of wonder. Dad always warned never to let your expectations get in the way of your enjoyment. Still, on yet another hoof, I was getting tired, and it would be nice to take a break and stretch out for a bit. Shoving a hoof into my mouth to stifle a yawn, I began to lay myself out to take a quick nap, but a loud banging from within the keep startled me. It sounded like nothing I'd ever heard before, so much as every single possible tool being used at once, all banging and saws and odd whirring whizzing noises. "This better be good," I sniffed disdainfully. "You guys have been a little disappointing so far. Except you, Morg. Can I call you Morg?"
The Morgwyn is what it is, Baron.
It said, dropping down beside me.
No name given by your tongue changes that.
I closed my mouth, realizing I had been yawning again. I lay my head down between my hooves and curled my tail up beside me, getting comfortable. I was just going to lay down for a little while longer. It had been such a long night. The Morgwyn's body radiated heat into the night, warming my side. When my eyes shut, it felt as if the ground fell out beneath me. Sleep waited below. Daphne. A swollen moon watched the quiet earth as we trotted into the trailhead. The distance was finally starting to catch up to me, but a lot less than I had feared it would. I waved a hoof in the air, slumping on a bench by the trail sign and postboard overlooking the western parking lot. My breath steamed in the air, and I was grateful for the scarf and hat keeping at least a little warmth in. Hector was eager to continue, but Naomi hopped off anyway, clipping lights to his harness and taking another, a heavier floodlight, out for herself. I got up to continue, but she waved me off, chiding, "You rest, for at least a few minutes." Acquiescing, I settled back down, letting my breathing ease and shutting my eyes. It would only be for a moment. The sudden bark of an engine jerked me back awake, though my limbs were sore and slow to respond. Groggily, I realized I had fallen asleep, the cough of a motorcycle rousing me. My ears twitched, and I lifted my head sleepily, glancing about. I frowned and squinted at the light as it approached. Stiff and panicky, I got up quickly to hide and stumbled behind the trail sign. Peeking under the sign, I drew in a breath with a hiss as recognition flared. "Naomi!" I snapped at her. "What is he doing here?" "We need help, Daphne," she implored me, confirming her guilt. "I called him before leaving my place." "What did you say?" "Tell him to go away. I don't need his help." My ears lay back. Naomi shook her head. "We do. He knows how to fight. He can shoot a gun. He likes them. Which only proves he's insane." My hoofs stamped the earth. "Your cousins can use guns." "None of them are very stable," Naomi growled. "Look, Daphne, your ex-boyfriend is coming with us, whether you like it or not." Raising myself up to continue the argument proved fruitless. Naomi ignored me by turning around, smoothing her hair back, and fixing her hat as the young man on the motorcycle came to a stop nearby. I am absolutely not vindictive, which is why it was honest when I thought he looked like an ugly, good-for-nothing, too-tall, leather-bound idiot. "Hey, tall, dark, and handsome?" Naomi smiled winsomely, belying my inner thoughts. "That's all right, Princess," he replied, as he pulled off his helmet. "You can just call me Marcus." I narrowed my gaze and glared at him, hoping that I had some sort of unicorn magic that could cook him where I stood. Get a nice bacon scent going, searing him into his stupid black leather jacket. There would be a strong whiff of Romano, too, for his damned cheesy lines. Naomi rolled her eyes. "Yeah, I can only keep up the faux flirting thing for so long." "So what's the emergency?" He tucked his helmet under his arm. "I can count on one hand the number of times a beautiful girl has asked me to come somewhere in the middle of the night with all the guns I could borrow or steal." "Oh, really? How many other times?" Naomi tilted her head. "Once, but it was a misunderstanding." Marcus walked the bike forward towards the trees. "It definitely isn't this time," she said. "There's a problem, a big problem." She put her hands behind her back, rocking a bit on her heels. I need your help." I gathered. His jaw tensed and his eyes narrowed slightly. "Look, Nay, you're drawing this out a lot and making me nervous. What's the big deal?" "Amelia's in trouble." "Lil Anteater? What, did you get stuck in a tree chasing a butterfly?" He grinned tightly. Naomi looked at him, silent. He went on, trying to save the stupid joke. "And you need me to shoot the butterfly?" Oh, I hated him and his stupid, lame jokes. Why did I ever think he was charming? I must have been drugged or ensorcelled. No. That was terrible, by the way. But no. Naomi sucked in her breath, bracing. Em was kidnapped. Marcus swore and nearly ran over his own foot with the bike. Do the police know? What does us being out here have to do with anything? Wait. Did Daphne put you up to this? Is she here right now with a camera or something? By monsters. Yeah, okay. His tone was heated. Shouting, he called into the nearby woods. Okay, Daphne. You can come out now. I'm not playing along with any sick game, so just give up and show yourself. Well, I said with an airy tone myself. Sure. You win. I stepped out into the light. Marcus said nothing. The silence went on. I spread my smile into a slow, smug grin. Maybe this whole transformation thing was worth it to see this. Naomi and Hector began to scuff their feet at the scene. Naomi, Marcus asked, not taking his eyes off me. Did you slip me some LSD? Is this some sort of contact high? Just say no to drugs, she sang. Hector nickered in agreement. So, Marcus said. Nice horn. Thanks. I tossed my mane and pointed the tip of the horn at him. It's sharper than it looks. Marcus quirked a grin. Always knew you were a bit pent up, but I never knew you were secretly a furry. I will cut you! Guys! Naomi shouted, cutting into the fight just as it was getting good. Amelia? Kidnapped by horrible monsters? My cheeks reddened, which surprised me. It hadn't occurred that I was still capable of that, as I scraped the ground hard, staring at Marcus's shoes. The memory of those strange men flashed into my mind. Each of them was far stronger than I was. Even getting the drop on them, I had been unable to wrest so much as a stick free from them. Then there was that cat. There was no telling what it might have been able to do if it had tried to stop me as well. For his part, Marcus was glancing off into the woods. Without a doubt he was trying to process the giant bomb we had just dropped on him. Unless he thought I was wearing a very convincing costume, he knew that his entire world had just been upturned. Marcus, Daphne. We paused, having spoken over one another. I spoke up again, quickly, to get the first word in. I know we aren't going to get along, and I hate to say it, but Naomi is right. These things, we can't fight them without weapons. The police can't help us before you ask again, because I know that they've gone to another world entirely. How do you know that? Marcus asked. There were many questions in his eyes, but he had to start somewhere. Because I think I was in one already. I wasn't really paying attention at first, but the moon was wrong. It was a full moon, even. There was a creature with them, something that wasn't natural, with glowing eyes that these men were utterly terrified about. The men... I licked my dry lips, remembering that it had been a while since my last drink of water. I don't think they were human either. Shorter, thicker, with rough skin. They wore clothing that belonged in the 19th century and carried old weapons. They aren't from Earth. I lifted a hoof, looking at it with pursed lips. Neither of the things, the people that look like me. I met a unicorn just like I am now, 8 years ago. And you never mentioned this fact. Why? I spoke to my hoof, still unused to the sight. I did. I landed in therapy because of it. They told me that everything I had thought real was a lie. They did it because they cared about me and were concerned about me, and I believed them. The way my voice throbbed left me feeling disturbingly vulnerable. Leaving that landmine undisturbed, Marcus leaned against his bike. Okay, so, assuming this isn't the best prank ever played in the history of mankind, you want me to go with you into a dark forest in the middle of the night to chase down monsters no one has ever seen before to a world you believe in, because you had a friend you were told is imaginary, to rescue your kidnapped baby sister. Yes. My gaze shifted to the ground in front of his feet, my head lowered and ears drooping. Yes, That is what I am asking. Marcus kicked the stand for his bike and paced away. He stared off into the woods, running a hand through his dark hair. I watched, tugging at my scarf for lack of anything better to do. It was hard to fidget without actual hands. I even took a step forward, my hoofs clicking on the pavement, but thought better of approaching him. When he turned back, he fixed me with a finger. "If this is a trick, I am going to skin you and make a horsehide jacket. Do you get me?" Yeah, classy like... I snapped my jaws shut, nearly biting my tongue. After a pause, I went on. "Fine, whatever. Are you helping us or not?" "I'm doing this because your sister is a great kid, not because of you," he insisted. Lifting my head, I looked right at him. "That's great, so am I." We met gazes for a moment before he turned his face and nodded. "Let me stash my bike somewhere. Meet down the trail?" "Sure," I sighed. After a beat, I added, "Thank you." "Yeah, well, thank me when this is over," he muttered, as he fired his bike up again. He turned it and rode back away from the park, calling as he rode off, "And if someone steals my bike, it's coming out of your hide." I wanted to be stated for the record, Naomi. "I hate you," I said, though my tone held no real malice.
Noted.
That settled, I turned and walked along the trail. Hector and Naomi followed a moment later, the latter leading the former rather than riding him, to preserve his strength, no doubt. As we waited, my tension had grown to the point where the familiar night cry of Illya made me dive under a park bench. I settled for pacing, trotting in a circle around the gazebo. Naomi watched me for a while before groaning and throwing her hands up in disgust. When he came, he was easy to spot at least. Though I knew he had been camping, he wasn't a big outdoor person like Naomi was. A case for a hunting rifle was slung over one shoulder, and he was openly carrying a 9mm handgun in one hip. He had another case under one arm, which I assumed was another rifle, a shotgun, ammunition, or a combination thereof. It was a bit of a risk for him to carry all of that in plain view. If a park official saw him, he could be in fantastic trouble. "I'm here. We can start the party," he called, not making it any harder for said officials to find him. "Why am I suddenly hungry for cheese again?" I asked no one in particular, and made a gagging gesture with my hoof in my mouth when Naomi looked my way. "Let's get going." Naomi rolled her eyes. She was going to end up doing a lot of that before this journey was done, if that was enough to set her off. "Daphne, you lead. Fill us in on the way, all right? All the details you know and think might be the slightest bit relevant." A snort told her what I thought of her attempts, but I obliged. The trip back to the grove was a long way, and talking would help settle my nerves. I began heading west and north, keeping to a walk for now. Without riding a horse, Marcus couldn't keep up, and it would be petty to leave him behind. Though it was very tempting to make him run. "There's not a lot I haven't already told you," I grumbled as we crossed the bridge into the woods, my and Hector's hooves clacking noisily against the wood. "But all right." For the third time that night, I would have to unbury and relive my past, and it wasn't getting any easier. "When I was 8, I met a unicorn out here in the park. Her name was Leitmotif." As the trip progressed, the four of us heading deeper into the woods, I told Naomi and Marcus everything, what little I had the presence of mind as a child to inquire about anyway. There were unicorn and Pegasus ponies that lived in the magical land of Equestria. The name made Marcus snicker, which I felt oddly defensive about, as though they were indeed my people and my home. Next came everything I could remember of the conversation between the thugs, and I described that demon cat in detail, something the thugs had called a Morgwyn. Their questions in return were not very helpful.
"Did they say where they were taking Em?"
Naomi asked. Almost directly on top of her, Marcus asked, "What did they say they were going to do to her?" "How far is it to Equestria? Can anyone help us over there?" I racked my brains, but couldn't think of anything particularly useful to fill in those blanks with. Naomi could sense my frustration at least, and laid off, letting us continue in silence. So far, this little adventuring party was getting off to a great start. Every so often, I would gaze up to the sky to check our progress. Father and Amelia were more familiar with the stars than I was, but a changed moon was something even I could spot at a glance. It happened, appropriately enough, when I wasn't paying attention, of course. Taking a low path through a ravine, we had hopped over the stream and started up the other side when Naomi gasped, staring up at the sky. I tilted my head up, and sure enough, there was a completely full moon, as if we had just jumped half a week back in time. Okay. Someone explain to me how no one noticed this before in this park, Marcus demanded, and I was pleased to see that he was looking a little wild-eyed. He looked around as if expecting to see a cat monster come tearing out of the deep shadows. Can't help you there, I admitted. Not many people come this way, however. I mean, you saw how much trouble Hector was having back there. I nodded towards the racing stallion, who was looking restless at his inability to tear loose and run. He wasn't built for this rough terrain, but it barely seemed to affect me, hopping from one rock to the next with greater surety than I had ever had as a young woman. Maybe unicorns were part mountain goat. It's still a state park in Massachusetts, he insisted. Are you telling me the park rangers never come out this way?
Well,
Naomi chimed in, coming to my aid.
Sometimes hikers really are the first ones to stumble across places, especially in places with really wild geography. What we've seen isn't really that harsh, no, but there's always been something kind of weird about this park. There's old tales about it that the natives used to tell, and the colonials picked up on them. There are? My eyes widened. I never knew that. Oh, sure, Naomi nodded. Crazy things like three-headed horses or bear men or strange lights. There's a whole website devoted to the mysteries of the Evergreen Park. Like how it's really easy to get lost here, even if you have a good map and compass. I glowered at her. You're only telling me this now because... I thought you knew! I mean, it's the first thing I would have done. I looked the place up online. Chewing over that, I looked up at the full moon. Speculation wouldn't bring me any closer to an answer, though. A forest that misled people and held the secret of another world was a mystery I wasn't going to unravel in a few minutes. How I was able to get through it, and why me instead of another, were questions for another time. Leitmotif crossed my mind, and an uncomfortable writhing stirred inside my chest. I touched a hoof there, and closed my eyes, whispering, You always talked about the bonds of friendship, Light. If there's any truth to all this, please, please be there for me in any small way. A delicate hand touched against my back. Looking up to Naomi, I gave her a weak smile. Almost there, I promised. Who the hell put that there? Marcus yelled from up ahead. Like always, he had been utterly disinterested in our touching sentimental moment, and had gone off to explore. Rolling my eyes, I joined him, Naomi close behind, and we looked down over the ridge. I frowned. Off in the distance there was a light among the trees, casting a warm glow through the night shadows. Dunno, I admitted. I don't remember seeing this, but keep an eye out and stay quiet. We might be running into trouble. We fit actions to words and approached the light slowly, picking our way carefully through the thickening woods. The light I discovered as we drew close was a wrought-iron lantern hanging from a curved post, swinging softly in the gentle breeze. I looked back to the others, the sight giving me pause. I don't remember going this way. Let's turn back and keep going the way we were if we need to. We'll mark our passage somehow so we can find this place again if we need to. Though curious, we all returned to the ravine and took the other way up, the one I recalled taking originally. The going here was rougher, and Naomi had to watch the ground with her flashlight for potholes, while Hector complained. It was easy to mark trunks to keep track of our route by scraping bark away with my hooves. Sure, I knew Naomi had a knife or a hatchet stashed on Hector, and Marcus had probably brought a machete along with him. With everything that had been going on, though, with all the trouble I had caused, I wanted desperately to feel useful. We made good time for all that, regardless. The grove, I knew, lay just ahead. Naomi wisely shut off her flashlight and Hector's harness lights as we neared the clearing. The fire from earlier had long since gone out. Those thugs from before were long gone, and Amelia along with them. It was quiet as well.
but I still wanted to approach cautiously. Rather than crawling over the hill that overlooked the grove, I led Naomi and Marcus around it, trying to keep low and out of sight. When we arrived, we crouched in the brush, watching and waiting for a few moments before pressing in. Close up, the grove looked like a cross between a war zone and a lumber yard. Holes were gouged out of the ground, planks of perfectly sawn timber lay strewn at crazy angles, and the earth was nearly bare anywhere my struggle with the wand-wielding thug had taken place, or anywhere his wand had blasted the earth, transfiguring the fallen leaves littering the ground into a shower of white doves. But I didn't feel a pressing need to mention that. "Damn," Marcus muttered. He had taken out his hunting rifle and held it low. Strangely, I felt as comforted by its presence as he apparently did. Damn is right. I felt uncertain, standing there among the trees and staring at the blasted earth. I thought I'd died out there. I hope Amelia ran off, but I don't honestly know. I didn't see anything. To his credit, Marcus didn't say anything. He opted instead to look the grove over, and to my astonishment actually found something that might be of use. Bending down, he picked up a leather bag from near one of the holes. Faintly, I recalled where at last I had seen it. "Hey! That's one of the bags that one of the thugs had." I trotted over to the bag and examined it eagerly as he slipped the strap, opening it up. A couple of mouldy bits of cheese, needle and thread, a rusty knife, and a sheaf of papers exposed themselves to the light. Glancing at one another, we pulled the papers out and examined them with growing anticipation. Then mild defeat. Scrawled by hand, the script was in no language either of us recognized, let alone read. Squiggly lines and pictograms stared up from the page. There were pictures, but I had no real frame of reference to put them in. I kept looking for a theme or a message of some sort, but Naomi's triumphant cry of "Good news!" caught our attention. My ears perked up. "You found Amelia?" "Her feet, anyway. More properly, I found tracks." She pointed towards the earth with her flashlight, and I glared at the ground, unable to prise loose its secrets. Rolling her eyes, again, Naomi flickered her light around, adding, in a tone that suggested we were both idiots, "The ground's been swept clean of leaves in lines heading parallel to one another." "Duh." Her flashlight focused on an area near the side where half a print was visible in the mud. "And unless one of them is a Nike fan with really tiny feet, Emma's with them." There was a trail leading to Amelia. A bolt of lightning struck my brain. Tension soared inside me as I stared at the earth. My inner eye flowed along it in a great rush to imagine what lay ahead for Amelia at the end of that line. It didn't bear contemplating. I flinched away from my own inner imaginings. It changed nothing about the danger she was in. Bile rose in my throat and seared only half as badly as the acidic guilt pouring into my veins. I looked at Naomi and Marcus to either side of me. They were just standing there, planning our next move. It was unbelievable. How could they be so calm about it? "What is wrong with you two?" I stamped my hoof to get their attention, though it seemed my tone had already done that. They both looked at me wide-eyed, as though my sudden sharpness had caught them off guard. "Somewhere at the end of this, some things are doing horrible things to my sister, and you two are just sitting here. She could be hurt, or worse." My voice was raw, as much from the shouting as from anything else, but I had to get these idiots moving before things could get any worse. Naomi spoke slowly. "Daphne, we're worried too, but we can't just—" She was trying to be reasonable, but reason just wasn't going to cut it. "Amelia has been kidnapped by monsters," I snapped, cutting her off. "Blue-eyed, rough-skinned, magic-using monsters." Each description had me standing a little taller, glaring a little more sharply at Naomi. She tried to placate me again, but this time I ignored her. With a snarl, I lunged for her flashlight, snatching it from her belt with my teeth, and charged off into the night. Both Naomi and Marcus called after me in surprise and confusion as I left them in my dust. But I had the proverbial bit in my teeth now. I was going to take it and run. I was going to find Amelia and save her, and be the best sister there ever was forever. I would correct my mistakes, or die trying. With adrenaline pumping through my veins, I ran like I never had before. Each stride lifted all 4 of my hoofs from the ground, one after another, before I tensed and almost leapt forward from the last, one bound leading to the other in a powerful expression of equine athleticism. An annoying, whining little voice was telling me that this wasn't smart, that I was running at a full gallop in the dark with only the moon and a wobbling light to see by. I batted it aside as easily as one might a fly, tucking my head into the cold wind. Every time a worry popped up, it was short-circuited with the memory of Amelia's face. The shock of catching my hoof in an unseen hole, my ankle brushing the edge as I rushed past, turned that buzzing little fly into a screaming foghorn. I had nearly stumbled as it was. If that hole had been just another half-inch further up the trail, the full weight of my body would have come crashing down on my ankle, and likely snapped every bone there like a dry twig. It was a cold dose of reality straight in the face, like a bucket of icy water. I was being an idiot. Even if I did manage to make it through the woods without breaking my neck, charging directly into the unknown would work no better than it had the last time I attempted it. I tried to stop, desperately fighting against the inertia of my own stupidity. This, too, went horribly awry. My skidding hoof caught on a root, which immediately pitched me forward into the air. There was a brief moment to reflect on how unfair life could be, before the ground rose up to meet me, knocking me senseless. Next thing I knew, I was staring up at the night sky as it spiderwebbed through the dark forest canopy. The world was upside down, and I tasted metal on my lips. Immediately, I rolled to the side, which I immediately regretted as pain lanced through my body. Naomi's flashlight glared harshly at me. Dazed and definitely bruised, I slumped there for a minute, my forceful charge converted into an equal but opposite defeatism. Even if I could have, I didn't want to get up just then. I had very nearly gambled away my one chance to rescue Amelia. If I had broken my neck, I would never have seen her or anyone ever again. If I managed to break something else in the fall, there would be no way for me to continue. Guilt mixed with shame and settled over me, like a smothering blanket as I struggled to breathe, biting back tears. It would have been so easy just to lay there in self-pity, but I fought myself back enough to try and look at the situation. Gently I lifted my head and glanced around. There was a swath of unturned grass, displaced leaves and mangled bushes about 20 feet long down the side of a hill behind me. It was all starkly illuminated by Naomi's flashlight, which was another 10 feet down the hill. All but one of my legs were still functional, save the foreleg that had been caught on the root. Its ankle stung, and was understandably sore, probably sprained, but I wagered it would still take my weight. I hadn't gotten off scot-free, a fact that was punctuated by a bloodied snout as I rubbered at it with my good foreleg, but it could have been much worse. Escaping complete disaster was a small comfort, though, because I knew it had been dumb luck that had spared me, not any brilliance or quick thinking on my part. I digested my actions in silence. No one had ever taught me how to deal with situations like this. I didn't know how to keep a cool head in a crisis. I wasn't a soldier, nor was I a policewoman, or a firewoman, or a storybook protagonist with a bag full of magical acorns and fairy wishes. All Amelia had to say for was a mixed-up, colourful horse for a sister, and her 2 weird friends. A mixed-up horse who kept getting in over her head, and making mistakes that could get herself killed. If I had been worth a damn, I wouldn't have let my fears drive me like they had. Pounding feet alerted me to the return of my friends, and I turned my head to watch them approach. "The hell, Daphne?" Marcus demanded. He was puffing a bit of the hard run to catch up. I couldn't even take pleasure in that right now. "Daphne, are you crazy?" Naomi asked, with more concern, keeping a steadier pace and guiding Hector by his lead. "You shouldn't run in the night like that. You could have been killed." She embraced my head and then started checking my legs with a horse trainer's professional eye. It took her no more than a glance to notice that I was favoring one. "I know." I let her examine me with little complaint, only wincing as she handled my ankle. "You've sprained it, but it isn't so bad. There's no swelling that I can see, and you seem to still have full mobility. Just keep weight off it for a while. We don't know how well you bounce back from injury, and it could be a big problem if one of us is hurt out here." She exhaled as she set my leg down, then went about adjusting my scarf and hat with almost motherly tenderness. For all that she was a year our junior and an aggressive moocher, Naomi could play the big sister pretty well. I lowered my head again. There was a bitter taste in my mouth. I know. I shut my eyes. Daphne. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, I whispered. I felt so weak. Part of me wanted to bury myself in the earth, and the other part of me wanted to set the forest on fire. Amelia needed me, and I was either charging like an idiot or weeping like a useless sod. You fall down, you get back up, Naomi told me, her tone steady, though her eyes were soft. Marcus held back among the trees, watching each way and not interfering. You fall off the horse, and then you get back on. Involuntarily I barked a laugh. It was stupid, and it wasn't even a joke, but it hit me in just the right way. Horse. I fell off the horse. Yeah, you kinda did, she agreed, laying a hand on my neck. She felt very close right then, and a warm knot formed inside my gut. With a weird mixture of chuckles and half sobs, I pulled her closer with one leg and tucked my head over her shoulder. I must have gotten her clothes muddy and her hair messy with tears, but she didn't care. We just held each other for what seemed like an eternity, then pulled apart. I wiped my face with the back of a hoof, and she helped me to stand. I carefully put weight down on each leg in turn before getting back on all four. Promise you won't do that again? She smoothed my mane back from my face. I won't do that again, I promised, glancing towards the ground. I don't know if I can promise not to be stupid again, but I can avoid running through the woods for no good reason. I breathed a sigh. I was not a hero. None of us were. We were all Amelia had, and we weren't enough. I smiled at her wanly. I can promise to try. We weren't enough, but we had to try anyway. I'll take it for now. Naomi pulled away. Are you ready to go? I flexed my sprained hoof to work out a crick before giving myself a little shake to free my coat of leaves. A flick of my tail rid it of a couple twigs. I looked up to the sky through the branches overhead, each of them almost entirely bare of foliage. Come on. Naomi stood herself up and dusted off her jeans. We've still got a good moon, and we're all eager to get to Equestria. Speak for yourself, Marcus groused, but he obliged and started walking. Yeah. I glanced back at the path as I trotted gingerly towards my fallen flashlight, picking it up before following after them. With our flashlights out and searching, we were able to keep the path in view. The thugs had crashed through the brush with little care for concealment, and their shuffling feet disturbed the leaves on the ground with wild abandon. Even in the light breeze, it would have taken hours to disturb the trail enough for it not to be obvious, and that was assuming Naomi couldn't still track it with her impressive skill. I felt my heart flutter every time she pointed out the imprint of a small shoe. Eek! Naomi shrieked, flinging herself back from a sapling she had been examining. Both Marcus and I reacted, he lifting his rifle and I bracing bravely, or quaking in my hooves, either way. What? Is it a monster? Where? Marcus shouted, shining his flashlight around. I felt oddly pleased to see that he looked as freaked out as I was, though I probably would have been more comfortable if he had been responding calmly. I was doing a fine job of fulfilling my promise to be steadier in a crisis. Spider! Naomi wibbled from behind Hector, shielding herself from the little tree with the stallion's bulk. Marcus and I paused and exchanged glances, our tension dissipating. Seriously? He asked me. I sighed, nodding. What? Naomi protested. It was a big one. Don't you go camping all the time, Nay? Marcus said. I swept the sapling with my flashlight, held between my teeth, wondering if I could see the thing. Yes, and every time I find a stop for the night, I sweep the campsite meticulously for bugs, spiders, snakes, and whatever other creepy crawly wants to make a nest or snack on me, she answered, shivering all over and hiding her face with her hat. You ever read about what a tsetse fly can do to you? I don't want to be an incubator. A what fly? Marcus blinked. Forget it. Haven't you at least camped out here?
What mysterious part of the forest no one can get to confused you, Marcus? Besides, no one stays in these woods long. I told you. People just don't feel comfortable staying out here long. Naomi shuddered. I always got the willies when I stayed longer than a few hours.
You get the willies getting out of bed in the morning from the looks of it.
I spied the spider with a little searching, and while it was somewhat large, it didn't seem all that terrifying. Turning the flashlight in my mouth ever thoughtfully, I snorted. For a moment I had been worried she had seemed somewhat a sort of actual monster spider. Even as I thought that, Hector abruptly brought his hoof down with an angry snort of his own, striking the earth hard. 3 flashlight beams focused there, and Naomi nearly passed out on the spot, her face turning alabaster. 8 hairy legs splayed out from a smear of arachnic goo. It was hard to tell in the present state it was in, but the spider that left the corpse had to have been as big as a grown man's spread hand. To think, a few minutes ago, I had been contemplating how life didn't resemble a story with irony built in. Right, I said with false brightness. Monster spiders. Check. The rest of the way blessedly passed without incident, though we were all becoming intimately aware of how strange things could turn at a moment's notice. Paranoia had us sweeping the darkness with our lights more often than we strictly needed to, and the shapes made therein seemed alert with frightful possibility. Every time, though, within a few minutes we were back to scanning the ground ahead and following the trail. As the canopy grew thick with tall evergreen pines and trees that yet had many of their leaves, I realized I could no longer hear any footsteps beside my own. Chilled, I slowed and glanced around. My eyes widened. Towering trunks stood all about me, and the moon hung fat and bright overhead, but there wasn't a sign of any of my 3 companions. Worried I had been separated, even though we had been fairly close together, I shouted, "Marcus! Naomi!"
"Here!"
Marcus called. I hurried my steps racing back towards them. They were in a copse of short pines clustered around a little spring-fed pond. Hector was taking a drink with obvious relish, and they both frowned at me as I approached. Thank goodness. Where did you 2 go? I asked. We were about to ask you the same thing, Naomi said to me in turn. We lost the trail a little bit ago, and when we looked around you weren't there. I was definitely on the trail. I shook my head. We probably got separated somewhere down there. Come on. Glancing past them, I frowned at Hector, whose eyes were rolling a bit back and forth. He pawed nervously at the ground. What's got his goat? I don't know. He's been spooked for a bit now, Naomi answered, peering down at me. Do you sense anything wrong? I gave her a sullen look, my eyes narrow and my lips drawn into a thin line. It was worth asking. Turning, I flicked my tail at her and started back to the trail. Let's keep together this time. We did exactly that as we proceeded to follow the track. Our bodies were so close that I even brushed against them with my flanks from time to time. Dark clouds gathering on the horizon promised rain before morning. Hopefully, we would be in shelter by then, or else on another world entirely. That is, of course, if we weren't already on some other world. Up ahead, a stream stretched across the pathway, its waters rippling in the moonlight. Gathering, I charged to a gallop and leapt across it easily. 10 to 12-foot leaps should have been more concerning, but I had become a great deal more confident in my abilities. Turning, I looked to see how Marcus and Naomi were faring, and... Oh, damn it! I swore, and stamped a hoof in frustration. You 2 would get lost in a McDonald's playpen, I shouted, and then immediately thought better of it. The woods around me were taller and denser than they had been only a moment before, and there were night birds calling in the distance now. Some of them I could identify. Some. I took a running leap again, and cleared the river easily, tense as I trotted back. My legs were holding up fine so far, but each of those jumps had elicited a little twinge in my twisted ankle. I had no desire to test it more than I had to, and that little pins and needles sensation was making me nervous. The sound of approaching hoofsteps gave me pause, and Naomi ducked a branch to pull Hector up next to me. The big horse tried to nose at me, and I shoved him away with a hoof. "What's the deal?" I demanded. "Where's Marcus?" I I don't know, but you just disappeared, she answered at once. I swear, we were right next to you, and then it got all windy and you were gone and the trail was like 20 feet away. Then Hector started tugging at me, so I got on him and he led me right here. Chewing on my lower lip, I considered that. Lead me back to Marcus, I suggested, a notion niggling at my brain. When we found him, he was leaning with his back against a maple trunk, pistol in hand. He nodded at us. You noticed something odd, too? Definitely, I answered. We were right next to each other. There's no way you should have gotten lost. You can't lose someone that badly in 2 seconds if they're just walking like that. Maybe. I have an idea. He pulled a rolled-up paper from his jacket pocket, one of those the thugs had been carrying. Look at the illustration up top. Naomi pointed the flashlight at it, and we both crowded in for a look. In the light, we could see that there was a hand-drawn image of men in funny helmets and crests riding horses. No. On second thought, those weren't normal horses. The artist wasn't exactly a life-drawing expert, but the big eyes and short snouts were rather distinctive. Each was saddled and bridled for riding, and the front few men were charging through the water with them. It's thin, but... I frowned. Well, it can't hurt to try. Naomi didn't see the river until she had come riding, and we were all so close we should have stayed together if this were natural. Okay, so, Naomi, we'll go across with you on Hector, and I'll take him back and come for Marcus. Naomi frowned. I don't like the thought of being out here all alone, but... Okay. She turned and started to mount, but hesitated. Wait, you'll have trouble getting him to cross a river without a rider. He's not going to do that sort of thing on his own, not if it makes him nervous. I'll manage. I waved a hoof dismissively. Besides, we don't have much of a choice here. There's no way that Hector can hold 2 people. What, really? Marcus asked. He's a big guy. And Naomi's like 80 pounds soaking wet, most of which is hair. Hector is a racing horse, Naomi told him primly, and while he may be able to carry 2 riders in a pinch, I'm not going to risk him hurting himself, especially if he has to jump. The landing can go bad, and too much weight can hurt him. Fine, fine. Marcus lifted his hands placatingly. Here, let's just try this. You ride Hector, and I'll tie his reins about my wrist. Naomi considered that for a moment and nodded, tossing the reins down to him. When I started ahead again, I was pressed up against Hector's side, and Marcus was tied securely around his reins on the other side of the horse. As a unit, we traversed the leaf-strewn earth and beheld the sparkling river stretching across our path. It seemed so peaceful here, now that I stopped to think about it. I put a hoof into the water. It felt pleasant, just cool enough to be soothing to my aching legs. Light must have loved splashing through this every day, I mused aloud. It does look nice. Naomi took her reins from back from Marcus and let Hector step delicately across the shallow water. With a deep breath, she inhaled. So, this is another world? Beats me, I answered, preparing to join Marcus as he confidently put a foot into the water. I wasn't certain what it was at first that warned me. My ears were more sensitive than theirs were, so maybe I was just the first to hear the rumbling. Leaping forward, I bit into Marcus's jacket collar and hauled backwards. With all 4 hooves digging into the earth, I managed to unbalance him and drag him onto the earth side of the shore with me just as the gentle river erupted in violence. Frothing white water rushed down the path with the force of a train, and its passage nearly soaked us with churning foam. As Marcus and I tumbled back in relative safety, I couldn't help but marvel as the raging waters seethed, then calmed as if nothing had happened. The force of that water could have knocked a tank over, let alone a single squishy human. Are you 2 okay? Naomi's voice was frantic. Hector danced nervously, giving her some trouble in controlling him with his hoofs churning up the wet earth. We're fine, Marcus called back, checking his bags. Rising to meet Naomi when she dashed across the quiescent river with Hector, we settled back from the bank. Looking over the papers, I planted a hoof on an illustration of waves rushing up to swallow men. Aha! Congratulations, you discovered that we're all idiots, Marcus griped. He paused in wiping down his outfit at the sound of a distant howl. Naomi shook water from her long hair.
Well, there's no way we're getting all three of us across like that. I wouldn't want to risk Hector on the off chance that it decides that 2 riders aren't good enough. I don't know that we have enough time to figure something out, either. Do you have a better idea? I quirked an eyebrow. Well, actually, yes, she said, and reached into one of Hector's bags, pulling a set of leather straps out. Immediately I backpedaled, crawling my back up a tree with my forehooves out to either side. Why did you bring that? When did you bring that? Keep that thing away from me! I stared at the object in her hand as with revulsion. The bridle seemed to me to gleam dangerously in the moonlight. I just brought it for Hector in case his broke. Her tone was too innocent to be anything but false. She held out the bridle towards me. It might as well have been a live snake for all I cared. No way, no how, I shouted. We'll figure out how to get across without it. We don't really have time to think about it. Naomi shook her head. Now get over here and put on the bridle. We'll make a saddle for you out of blankets and I'll ride you. It's just until we get across. Like you haven't been preparing for this the whole time. I pointed a hoof at her. Not gonna happen. Look, I'll carry you without one if I have to. Naomi's right. Marcus came up on my other side. Besides, the men in the picture had bridled those ponies too. Suspecting his motives were no more wholesome than Naomi's, I glared at him. Naomi pulled back as I flailed my hoofs defensively, warning her off. Then she and Marcus exchanged a conspiratorial glance while she reached for her rope. Half a second later, I was 10 feet up the tree. I scrambled with my hooves and scaled it faster than I could have imagined, then wrapped all 4 legs about the trunk. How the hell did you climb that with hooves? Marcus demanded, shining his flashlight up. The light made me squint. I don't know and I don't care. Stay away, you freaks! I shouted. The tree was wobbling as I shifted here and there. It bowed somewhat under my weight, but held. Then I risked a peek down below and saw Naomi twirling a lasso and groaned. No way. You can't be serious. I'll break my neck if you try to drag me down. I, however, was not the target. She swung the line and cinched it hard when it fell above my head, to encircle the upper part of the trunk. Attaching the other end to Hector, she led him away and the tree bent inexorably. I saw Marcus laying down his hard case. When he balanced on top of it, he was easily able to get a hold around my middle. I initially refused to let go, but I discovered to my astonishment that ponies were ferociously ticklish. Or I still was, at any rate. Stop! I laughed against my will. You monster, stop! There was no help for it. My grip slipped and I tumbled into his arms. Though too heavy to catch, he broke my fall as we toppled and fell to the earth. Ow! Marcus groaned and struggled under me. 300 pounds of alien horse were difficult to dislodge. Serves you right, I muttered, and looked up to find Naomi staring down at me with an unwholesome gleam in her eyes as she held the bridle. I swear I will murder both of you in your beds. I know it's upsetting, Daphne, but we really do need to do this, she said. You're strong enough to carry me easy, while Hector would get hurt carrying both of us. You should have taken a stronger riding horse then. If wishes were horses, we'd... Naomi pursed her lips. Well, we'd not be in this mess, actually. I took Hector because he's the fastest we've got, and one of the only horses on the ranch who's been trained around firearms. Any of the others would spook. We really are almost out of moonlight, too, and once it drops below the trees we aren't going to be able to do any riding, no matter what we want. My protests might have continued, but Hector stamped a hoof nervously. One could almost imagine that he was begging us to hurry. Something was spooking the big Arabian, and whether it was being so close to magic or something else, none of us were in a great hurry to find out. Fine, I muttered. Just make it quick. Get off, Marcus groaned. Your fat rear is crushing my ribcage. Glaring at him, I rose and flicked my tail at his face disdainfully. With efficient movements, Naomi fit the bridle around my face, having to cinch it pretty far to get around my nose. A death glare did little to ruffle her. Naomi was almost beside herself with joy, taking heavy blankets from Hector's bags and packing them onto my back. I probably could have objected more strongly, but we had to hurry while we still had moonlight. Besides, Hector was still nervous, and something did seem rather threatening about where we were. I didn't like it, so I could put up with being bridled for a few minutes if it got us all out of here. I also had no idea how to get the damn thing off on my own. Stupid hooves. This is so undignified, I muttered. I would just have to pay them back later. In spades. Bracing my hooves, I waited, and my friend settled onto my back as I tensed gingerly. Though I imagined I would have considerable difficulty throwing a skilled rider like Naomi, I knew she wouldn't stay if I couldn't bear her weight. Normally a horse could carry a rider between a fifth and a third of its mass, more if it was particularly stocky or strong, or if the rider was good, but I marveled to see that she might as well have been a child. Evidently, equestrians had an edge up in raw strength, even if other physical traits were lacking. Comfortable? Naomi patted my neck. She was balanced adroitly and was careful not to interfere with my poncho. No, I snapped. She giggled and detached the reins. As I turned my head questioningly, she gave me a raised eyebrow, answering my unspoken question. You didn't seriously think I was going to try and control you, did you? Even if I tried, you could just roll on top of me or smash me into a tree. Blushing, I stammered but had no answer. I worried at the ground of the hoof. Just do this for me. She lay across me and tucked her head against my mane, her own hair blowing in the gentle wind. Fine, I whined, but I still am pissed off. Are you two girls done braiding each other's hair? Marcus turned in a circle with Hector. He wasn't a terribly strong rider, and Hector was rolling his eyes back at him in a manner that suggested the horse was seriously considering ignoring him and racing off. Bucking him off might have been entertaining, but there was no way I was letting Marcus put his legs around me, in any sense. There was a sarcastic remark in there somewhere, but I paused, my ear twitching as I detected a noise. It sounded like a dog. Turning my head, my eyes scanned the trees. Hector, too, looked nervous. Did you hear that? Naomi asked, and I nodded. Marcus was about to ask as well, but the odd barking, baying noise was becoming clearly audible to everyone. What is that? He frowned, listening. A pack of hyenas? He reached for his gun, but had to grab the reins with both hands to control Hector, sawing at the horse to turn him. Not gonna find out. Hold on, Naomi. I lowered my head and started to canter, leading Hector and Marcus. As the baying grew louder behind us, I followed the trail to the river and picked up speed. With a leap, I soared over the barrier, and Naomi, for all that the night was frightful and the darkness deep, threw back her head and squealed in sheer excitement. With 2 bridled mounts and 2 mounted children of men, we charged over the hill into a new land, into destiny, into Equestria.